Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Michael Wayne Jones. Michael Wayne Jones was born on May 1, 1981, in Brattleboro, Vermont. His life was complicated and difficult from a young age. Michael witnessed his parents repeatedly physically and mentally abusing each other, and he himself was also subjected to this abuse. When Michael was young, his father went to prison for unclear reasons, leaving him feeling empty and deeply affected. His mother remarried and had another son, Dana, bringing some happiness to Michael's life. However, their home life remained troubled. Michael's stepfather had trouble maintaining stable employment, which put a financial strain on his mother, forcing her to work 2 jobs to support the family. The stepfather was aggressive toward Michael and Dana. He used physical punishment. This has created an atmosphere that makes people feel scared and controlled. Michael was harshly punished for small mistakes, such as being late to school, and was often locked in a shed and subjected to sexual abuse. Michael's difficult life did not harden him. Instead, he showed kindness and a strong instinct to protect others, particularly his younger brother Dana. He is often the one to admit mistakes and take punishment for Dana, which brings the 2 brothers closer. Dana admired Michael's courage and love. Michael's stepfather was extremely controlling and rarely allowed him to interact with other children. His mother was too afraid of her husband to stand up for Michael or herself. This created a home environment that was isolated, secretive, and oppressive. With no outside help, Michael and Dana suffered ongoing abuse. The neighbors suspected that something was wrong in the household. In a desperate attempt to escape, Michael ran away from home but didn't know where to go. He was eventually found by authorities and shared the sad story of his family life. Unfortunately, no one helped him with his situation. Michael had difficulty expressing his genuine emotions, instead concealing them beneath a facade of indifference. He struggled with depression in his teenage years, which significantly impacted his mental well-being. However, at school, he found some relief from his struggles. Despite being introverted and feeling lonely, having responsibilities helped distract him from his difficult home life. Fortunately, Michael met Dorothy, a local business owner. Dorothy introduced him to her daughter, and although the daughter's name is not known, but Michael formed a strong bond with her. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance, navigating its share of highs and lows. This relationship brought out Michael's gentle, thoughtful, and cautious nature, revealing a more nuanced side of his personality. Dorothy was happy to see Michael in a new light, but at the same time, she felt concerned. She observed that he became uneasy whenever it was time to go home. Despite her daughter's frequent visits with Michael, he made a concerted effort to keep her away from his residence. Concerned by these signs, Dorothy decided to have deeper conversations with Michael. Michael eventually opened up to Dorothy about his concerns for his mother and brother's well-being. This enabled Dorothy to recognize the emotional burden and suffering that Michael was experiencing. After finishing high school, Michael enlisted in the United States Navy, which marked the start of a new chapter in his life. The Navy instills in him a sense of direction and purpose within a highly organized environment. As Michael developed a strong affection for the Navy, he realized that he had made the right choice. His newfound sense of happiness is largely due to his close relationship with his teammates. Although he would occasionally drink, Michael was always responsible and showed up for work, proving to be a calm and composed individual. During this time, Michael was dating a colleague. However, he quickly realized that the relationship was unhealthy when she became violent towards him. This brought back painful memories of his childhood. As his depression worsened, he realized he needed to end the relationship. Following the breakup, Michael dedicated himself to furthering his career. He pursued specialized training in combat medical care, which ultimately led to his appointment as a medic in the Marine Corps. Afterward, Michael met Sarah, and they fell deeply in love, eventually getting married. After getting married, Michael resigned from the Marines so he could devote his time to supporting his wife. Sarah had a positive impact on Michael's life, encouraging him to make good choices. Together, they had 3 children, and Michael was determined to be a devoted father, providing them with the best possible upbringing. In their relationship, Sarah often took the lead in decision-making, but Michael was always supportive of her choices. In 2011, Sarah found a job in Orange County, Central Florida, and the family moved there. She worked at the Mount Dora Animal Hospital, which was managed by Bo Delaporte. After Michael had difficulty finding a job, Sarah convinced Delaporte to take him on. She also emphasized the experience Michael had gained from his previous job. Michael quickly settled into his new role and showed outstanding commitment. Michael emanated happiness and had a clear passion for his work. Michael's positive demeanor made him highly sought after by pet owners. His employers, particularly Delaporte, grew fond of him, and their relationship blossomed into a strong friendship built on trust. Delaporte even entrusted him with some management responsibilities at the animal hospital. In 2014, Delaporte hired KCI, a new veterinary technician. Born on December 23, 1986, in Ion, Indiana, KCI was the second of 3 daughters to Nikki and David. She had 2 siblings, named Sarah and Brandy. She brought immense joy and positivity to her family, and also spread that energy to those around her. As KCI grew older, her love and concern for those around her deepened, fueled by her spiritual beliefs and moral principles. This gives her the strength to face life's challenges. In high school, KCI met Richard, and they were initially attracted to each other. However, as they dated, Richard noticed KCI's jealous and possessive tendencies. Her insecurity sometimes led to hurtful words and actions. Nevertheless, Richard remained patient and calm, and they eventually married after completing their studies. Over time, KCI's mother moved to Florida. Sarah and Brandy soon followed. Due to KCI's close relationship with her family, she and Richard relocated to Florida in 2009. After settling in, KCI worked occasionally as a transporter and sometimes as a dog groomer. She also began learning the trade of a veterinary technician. During this time, KC and Richard welcomed their first child, Cameron. KCI was devoted to Cameron's well-being and made it her top priority. A few years later, KC and Richard had their second child, Preston. The children grew in a happy environment filled with laughter and loving care. As KCI advanced in her veterinary technician career, she found a job at an animal clinic. There, she met Michael, who was Delaporte's right-hand man. Michael and KCI got along well, but Delaporte and Sarah both suspect that there may be something more than mere friendship between them. Even though both of them have families, but Michael found himself attracted to KCI. This attraction affected his focus and performance at work. Michael tried his best to satisfy KCI's needs, and she reciprocated Michael's feelings, and as a result they began an affair. Sarah and Michael decided to get a divorce, as did KCI and her spouse, Richard. After the divorce, Sarah was granted custody of her 3 children and relocated to Jacksonville. In contrast, KCI and Richard chose to share custody of their children, Cameron and Preston, according to a certain rule. KCI took her parenting responsibilities seriously and made sure to transport the children as agreed. Delaporte's frustration increased as Michael's work performance at the clinic continued to deteriorate. To make matters worse, Michael inappropriately approached other employees, overstepping professional boundaries. A betrayal occurred when Michael asked for time off, claiming his mother had passed away, only to use the leave for a beach vacation. Delaporte discovered the truth and subsequently terminated Michael's employment. Seeking revenge, Michael burglarized the clinic, stealing money, computer equipment, and even a gun. Delaport identified Michael as the perpetrator and contacted the authorities. With KCI's assistance, Michael escaped to New Mexico but was eventually caught by the police. After serving a short prison sentence, Michael was released. Despite Michael's past actions, KCI remained devoted to him. The couple moved in together, and Michael became a stepfather to Cameron and Preston. Eventually, in 2017, around Halloween, Michael and KCI got married and started a new life together in a 2-bedroom trailer. Although the space is small, the affordable rent makes them feel grateful to have found a place where they can be together. In the same year, they welcomed their first child, Mercalli, followed by Ayana the next year. As their family grew to 4 children, Michael took on a job as a construction laborer to support them financially, while KCI dedicated herself to being a homemaker. She took great joy in every stage of her children's development and sought ways to capture those special moments. This led her to create a YouTube channel where she shared milestones of their family life. At first glance, their life seemed perfect, with Michael appearing calm and KCI's laughter frequently punctuating their videos. However, their relationship was not as it seemed. Behind closed doors, the couple frequently argued, and their disagreements had become a persistent problem. KCI's distrust of Michael led her to regularly check his phone, and she became suspicious whenever Michael worked late hours. A heated argument broke out between them on the night of July 10, 2019, while their children slept. The argument started when KCI discovered a message on Michael's phone that made her believe he was being adultery. The confrontation quickly turned violent, with KCI grabbing a baseball bat and pushing Michael. Michael then took the bat from her and, in a state of blind fury, he repeatedly struck her until she died. Michael put KCI's body in a plastic bag and hid it in a closet. He tried to clean up the scene as much as he could. The next morning, he took steps to prevent the children from finding out what happened. He then put KCI's body in his car. To avoid raising suspicion, Michael continued to post on KCI's social media accounts in the following days. On July 26, Michael sent a text to Richard, pretending to be KCI, asking him to take care of Preston and Cameron. Michael also texted KCI's mother, asking her to care for Mercalli and Ayana. When Richard arrived to pick up Preston and Cameron, he found it strange that KCI was not there and expressed his concerns to Michael. However, Michael dismissed Richard's concerns, saying KCI had left town for a few days. KCI's mother had a similar reaction when she came to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. Later that day, Michael called Sarah and told her that he and KCI were separating, and he needed to take care of the children while she worked. He then picked up the children and took them to his home. During the drive, the children noticed a strong, unpleasant smell in the car, similar to rotting meat. Michael continued to visit his children at Sarah's residence for 2 weeks, driving back and forth between his home and Sarah. Meanwhile, the body of KCI remained hidden in his car. As the days went by without hearing from her daughter, KCI's mother grew increasingly worried. On August 10th, Richard returned Cameron and Preston to Michael. This time, KCI's absence was even more noticeable, and it increased Michael's concern. During their brief conversation, Michael apologized for causing Richard and KCI to divorce, and acknowledged the challenges Richard went through in his relationship with KCI. As the new school year approached, Michael realized that the absence of the children and KCI would likely raise suspicions among the elementary school staff. This realization led to a tragic turn of events. On a night that remains unspecified, Michael took Cameron out of bed and suffocated him, then placed his body in a suitcase. The next morning, he did the same to Preston, putting his body in a garbage bag. A few days later, the owner of the trailer park where Michael lived served him an eviction notice, giving him 2 weeks to vacate the premises. Amidst this dire situation, Michael went to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. When KCI's mother saw Michael again without KCI, she became overwhelmed with anxiety and had a nervous breakdown. Her mind was consumed by a single question: where was her daughter? Michael was driving with his daughters, Mercalli and Ayana, when he was suddenly overcome with guilt. He felt trapped and decided to turn himself in at the police station. However, when he reached the door, he changed his mind and turned back home. Upon returning, he filled the bathtub with water and tragically drowned his daughters. After their deaths, he placed their bodies in a plastic container. As Hurricane Orion approached Florida in early September, a state of emergency was declared, prompting many people to seek shelter. Michael took advantage of the chaos to transport 5 bodies, including his wife and children. He loaded them into his truck and headed north to stay with Sarah. During his stay, Sarah noticed that Michael never contacted KCI or inquired about the children, which made her uneasy. However, she chose not to ask questions due to her awareness of the marital issues. After the hurricane passed, Michael's neighbors reported a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the trailer to the property owner. The owner checked the trailer, first looking through the windows and then entering it. Although the furniture and personal belongings were still there, the smell was overwhelming, but nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. KCI's mother grew desperate as she tried to make sense of her daughter's disappearance. She suspected Michael might be in trouble with the law and hiding, which could explain why her daughter was also in hiding for her own safety. Rather than waiting, KCI's mother contacted the sheriff's office and requested a welfare check at Michael's house. When officers arrived for the welfare check, they found the house empty but appeared to have been recently cleaned. However, a strong smell of decomposition lingered, contradicting the presence of cleaning supplies near the entrance. Before the officers could investigate further, the property owner arrived and asked them to leave. Meanwhile, with the bodies still in his vehicle, Michael drove out of state into Georgia. He stopped near a wooded area and disposed of the bodies of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayana. As he continued driving and checked his GPS, Michael lost control of the vehicle and crashed. Although Michael escaped without injury, the vehicle was severely damaged. The police quickly arrived at the scene of the accident and were immediately hit with the strong, terrible odor coming from the wrecked truck. They find a suitcase in Michael's truck, and when they open it, they discovered KCI's gruesome body. Michael broke down and confessed to his heinous crimes on the roadside. He also revealed the location of the children, leading to his immediate arrest. KCI's family was devastated by the news, feeling as though their world had shattered. In shock and grief, they still do not understand why Michael could have so brutally murdered his wife and children. Sarah, in particular, felt an intense hatred towards Michael, a sentiment she had never experienced before. With a search warrant and new evidence in hand, investigators went back to KCI's house. Upon entering, they were met with a strong, unpleasant odor and a noticeable reddish stain on the carpet. The agents began collecting evidence from the scene, while the autopsies were being performed to gather more information about the tragic incident. Forensic results showed that Cameron sustained a fractured jaw with no other visible signs of trauma. But a towel was in his mouth. Preston was found with a noose around his neck. Mercalli and Ayana were found in a small plastic bag together, which also contained a baby bottle with Ayana's name on it and a pair of pink sandals. The cause of death for Mercalli and Ayana was determined to be drowning. KCI's autopsy results showed a severe blunt force injury to the front of her skull and face, but no other signs of trauma were found on her body. When questioned by authorities, Michael remained calm and provided precise and honest answers. Michael even thanked the police officers who arrested him and said he felt he had no other choice. Michael provided a clear and chronological account of incident from the fight with KCI to his subsequent arrest. When asked about his motives, Michael said that his actions stemmed from the harsh life circumstances he endured, which led him to believe that his decision was the only possible solution. The tragedy profoundly affected everyone involved, but it was particularly shattering for Sarah. She found it extremely difficult to accept that her children had been exposed to and had lived with someone like Michael. As a result, Sarah struggled with mental health issues after learning the truth. Michael was subsequently charged with second-degree murder for KCI's death and 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder for the deaths of the children. Michael pleaded guilty to the charges, bypassing a trial and moving directly to the sentencing phase. A 12-person jury then had to decide between 2 sentences, life imprisonment or the death penalty. The defense strategy focused on Michael's difficult childhood and mental health issues, highlighting various psychological disorders that may justify a reduced sentence. However, state prosecutors argued that the extreme brutality of the case worthy a death penalty. In January 2023, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, as required by state law. After a brief 99-minute hearing, the judge formally sentenced Michael to death. He also received a separate sentence of life imprisonment without parole for the murder of KCI. Michael's lawyer quickly filed an appeal following the sentencing. However, on April 28, 2023, the judge rejected the appeal and confirmed the original sentence. Prosecutors were pleased that justice had been achieved for KCI's family. Michael is still in prison, awaiting his scheduled execution. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Ewell family. Dale Ewell was born in Ohio during the Great Depression. This challenging time in him the value of hard work and the importance of money, as he learned to appreciate every dollar he made. His family struggled financially, which likely motivated him to become determined and ambitious. Dale married Glee Michelle, a multi-talented woman, who worked as an elementary school teacher, a translator for the CIA, and served on a commission at the State Bar of California. They had 2 children, Tiffany born in 1967 and Dana in 1971. Dale's success provided the Ewell family with a comfortable life, including a home in Sunnyside, a beachfront property in Peraro Dunes, luxury cars, and designer clothing. After serving in the Air Force, Dale became a successful businessman. He eventually became the president and owner of Western Piper Sales Incorporated, a company that sold small aircraft. The primary source of the Ewell income came from selling light aircraft and investing heavily in the stock market. After establishing a successful aviation business, Dale expanded into buying several farms, accumulating substantial wealth. Together, Dale and Glee were worth an estimated $8 million, embodying the American dream. Despite their wealth, they lived modestly. Their children chose different directions in life. Tiffany pursued a similar career to her parents, whereas Dana chose a distinctly different route. At university, Dana presented himself as a successful entrepreneur, falsely claiming to be the source of his family's wealth. This fabricated story gained attention from a local newspaper and was even included in his school yearbook. In 1990, while attending Santa Clara University, Dana was fixated on wealth and luxury. He owned a BMW and had access to funds, allowing him to indulge in expensive items like jewelry. From a young age, Dana had a habit of lying and making up stories. Despite being intelligent and well-educated, Dana's ambitions went beyond comfort, wealth, and a promising future. He had the same ambitions as his father, but he didn't have the drive to achieve them in a proper and lawful way. Dana began fabricating elaborate and false stories about his accomplishments and importance while he was a student at the University of Santa Clara. He lied to both faculty and peers, claiming he was the head of a multi-million-dollar company. His false narrative included starting as a stockbroker at 18, moving to aircraft sales, and eventually becoming president of his own aircraft manufacturing company. The tension between Dana and his father, Dale, was largely unknown to others. Dana's tall tales may have caused his father embarrassment and contributed to their conflicts. Despite Dale's humble beginnings and generous support for his children, Dana seemed to have an excessive sense of entitlement. Dana Ewell presented himself as excessively self-centered and arrogant, prioritizing his wealth and social standing above all else. On Easter Sunday, April 19, 1992, the weather in Sunnyside, California was mild with partial sunshine, resulting in a pleasant afternoon. Dale, 59, spent the Easter weekend at his beach house with his 57-year-old wife, Glee, and their 24-year-old daughter, Tiffany. Glee and Tiffany returned to their home in Sunnyside by car, while Dale flew his private plane to his hangar and then drove home. When they arrived, they were ambushed. Tiffany was shot in the head and killed, followed by Glee, who was shot multiple times. The killers stayed in the house, waiting for Dale to arrive. 30 minutes later, Dale arrived home and was also fatally shot as he entered the house from the garage. 2 days later, Dana, the youngest member of the family, tried to contact his parents but was unable to reach them. Dana had spent the Easter weekend in San Francisco with his girlfriend and her father, an FBI agent. On April 21, 1992, the family's housekeeper, Juanita, arrived at the house for work and found Tiffany's body lying in a pool of blood in the kitchen. Juanita was distraught and sought help from a neighbor, who called the police. Meanwhile, Dana was still in Monterey, California. At the time of the murders, Dana was contacted by the authorities. His girlfriend's father quickly arranged for him to fly to Fresno, and Dana was visibly upset during this time. The police then started a thorough investigation, spending many days collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. The crime scene was made to look like a robbery. However, experienced detectives believed the scene was deliberately staged to make it appear as though the family had been attacked and then killed by an intruder. Upon further examination, detectives found several irregularities, including the lack of weapons, bloodstains, footprints, or DNA evidence. Instead, the detectives found that the attack was carefully planned and carried out. The attacker was a skilled shooter, missing only one shot, and had even picked up the spent bullet casings inside the house. Investigators found a box of 9mm ammunition that Dale had purchased. It was later discovered that it had been used in the murder. The home appeared to have been ransacked, but nothing valuable was missing. There was no evidence of forced entry, and the alarm, which was usually turned on, had been turned off. Investigators thoroughly examined the victims' backgrounds, searching for any clues that might be connected to their deaths. They looked into Dale's past dealings, which included selling airplanes to an individual later convicted of drug smuggling in the 1970s, and a questionable real estate transaction with Dale's brother that potentially put investors at risk of losing millions. The police thoroughly investigated and eliminated all other potential suspects with motives, ultimately they concentrating on Dana, as he was the one who would benefit the most from the tragic event. As the only surviving member of the Ewell family and the main beneficiary of the estate, Dana naturally became a person of interest. Even though he had a solid alibi, having been with his girlfriend and her FBI agent father at the time of the murders, the police couldn't shake their suspicions about him. Dana's actions did not ease the concerns of others, but rather intensified their suspicions about his involvement in the murder. Although he outwardly showed distress and even offered a $50,000 reward for the capture of the killer, his grief seemed insincere. His reaction to the horrific killing of family members seemed surprisingly subdued, as he displayed little of the shock and sorrow that people typically exhibit in response to such a traumatic event. Instead of focusing on mourning the loss of his loved ones, Dana seemed more concerned with his parents' wills and inheritance. He did something disturbing, inviting a friend to view the house while there was still obvious blood on it, demonstrating a disregard for the victims. Furthermore, he allegedly expressed contempt for the police investigation, calling the investigators dummies who would never solve the case. Dana eluded authorities for 3 years, during which time they thoroughly investigated every lead to help solve the case. The situation worsened after Dale's brothers reported Dana to the authorities, claiming he had done something wrong. According to them, Dana became furious when he heard the will being read, as he learned that he wouldn't have full access to the $8 million estate until he was in his 30s. Dana reportedly slammed his hands on the table and screamed, asking why his father could do this to him. The trust stipulated that his parents would cover his expenses until he was 25, then he would receive investment dividends until he was 30. At 30, he would have access to half of the estate, with the remaining half available at 35. Before the funeral, the Ewell brothers act to prevent Dana from reclaiming what he believes is his. However, Dana managed to obtain around $300,000 from an insurance policy. Dana's uncles actively prevented him from inheriting his father's assets, causing him significant frustration. Despite the growing scrutiny from investigators and accusations from his own family members that he was involved in the murder to gain control of the family estate, Dana showed no signs of worry. He continued to live a lavish lifestyle, showering his girlfriend Monica with expensive gifts and even helping with her education costs. However, it was unclear where his money was coming from. Investigators suspected that money was a key factor in the murders and dug deeper. They discovered that Dana had been stealing money from various sources, including his grandmother's trust account, which had held $400,000. By the time detectives stepped in, the grandmother was left with only $22,000 to cover her care at a nursing home. The discovery that Dana had been exploiting his grandmother for personal gain further strengthened the police's suspicions about his character. However, authorities still need concrete evidence to prove Dana's involvement in the murder. Joel, one of Dana's college acquaintances, was particularly drawn to Dana's stories of a wealthy, successful lifestyle. Joel found Dana's apparent ability to effortlessly attract beautiful women especially intriguing. People around were surprised by their friendship, as they seemed to have little in common. Dana was driven by a desire for higher social status, while Joel's interests lay in video games, firearms, and explosives. Despite their differences, Joel's friendship with Dana gave him the opportunity to attend fancy parties and meet attractive women. Shortly after the Ewell family murders, Joel dropped out of school and soon became Dana's roommate in the Ewell family's former home. This marked a significant development in the investigation. Both Dana and Joel started making unusual purchases, such as helicopter flying lessons, despite Joel having no apparent source of income. As a result, investigators began surveilling both, monitoring their communications through pagers and payphones. Authorities cloned Dana's pager and tapped his landline in May 1993. An officer overheard Joel discussing the investigation on a payphone, saying, "They don't have evidence, they'll try to catch you in a lie." Meanwhile, Dana continued spending lavishly, buying a new car for his girlfriend and paying her law school tuition. After using up the insurance payout, he took $400,000 from his grandmother's account, leaving her with only $22,000 for her nursing home expenses. In 1994, investigators shifted their focus to forensic analysis, which revealed that the murder weapon was a rare 9mm assault rifle made in Colorado. Records from the company showed that a rifle had been bought by Ines Jack Pond just before April 1992. Notably, Jack was a high school friend of Joel. When questioned, Jack first denied buying the rifle, then claimed he bought it as a birthday present for himself, and said the gun was later stolen. The evidence against Dana and Joel continued to mount. At one point, detectives visited Dana at his university dorm and told him they believed Joel was responsible for killing his family. Dana stayed silent, visibly pale. After the detectives departed, Dana and his girlfriend, Monica, promptly contacted Joel's brother, Radovic, but they did not realize that they were being followed by the police. On March 2, 1995, police arrested Dana, Joel, and Peter, Joel's brother, and Jack Pond. Peter had made a deal with the authorities, agreeing to testify against his younger brother and Dana in exchange for immunity. Peter confessed to the police that he had made a homemade silencer and attached it to the murder weapon. He also admitted to getting rid of the gun barrel, Joel's tennis shoes, and some gun magazines. Peter said he did these things with the help of Jack Pond. When Jack was arrested, he gave a different account of the gun. He said he bought the gun for Joel but didn't know it was going to be used for the murders. Jack also confirmed that he and Peter had disposed of evidence together. Jack received immunity in exchange for his testimony, just like Peter. As a result of statements made by Peter and Jack, the barrel of the murder weapon was found buried in a field in Rica. Unlike Peter and Jack, Dana and Joel were not offered plea deals. They were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, which made them eligible for the death penalty. The trial began in late 1997. Dana and Joel, who had previously been close friends and had even lived together in the house where the murders occurred, now had separate lawyers and took different stances during the trial. Prosecutors argued that Dana's motive for the murders was greed, claiming he had promised Joel a share of the inheritance. Dana's lawyer argued that he was innocent, suggesting that Joel and Jack had planned and carried out the murders. Joel's lawyer acknowledged the strong evidence against his client and focused on trying to save him from the death penalty. During the trial, Jack Pond testified that he had bought the murder weapon for Joel and helped dispose of it. He also said Joel had given him details of the incidents on the day of the murder, in April 1992. According to Jack, Dana had asked Joel for a favor that he found hard to refuse. Having taken steps to avoid leaving DNA evidence behind, Joel carried out Dana's plan by entering the Ewell residence. He shaved off all body hair and then waited 12 hours on a plastic sheet to minimize the risk of leaving any traces, including an eyelash. He was also instructed to retrieve all bullet casings. Tiffany was shot in the back of the head and died instantly, without seeing her killer. Glee, however, saw Joel and tried to escape to the office, but was shot and severely injured. Joel pursued her and eventually killed her. During the trial, it was revealed that Joel had shot Glee multiple times at close range, and that she had recognized him as a friend of Dana's who had visited the family a month earlier. After killing Glee, Joel reloaded his gun and put on new gloves, then waited for Dale to arrive, whom he also murdered. On May 27, 1998, after an 8-month trial, the jury delivered a finding Dana Ewell and Joel guilty on all charges. However, they could not agree on the sentencing. 2 votes saved Joel from the death penalty, while Dana escaped the death penalty by just 1 vote. In the end, both received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. Dana was imprisoned at Corcoran State Prison, 50 miles south of Fresno. He was among inmates like Charles Manson. His grandmother, whom he stole from, died in 1999. Dana claims to have undergone a spiritual transformation and become a Christian while in prison. Joel was imprisoned at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Meanwhile, Jack Pond pursued a career in law, becoming an attorney. Monica Zent broke up with Dana, finished law school, and established a successful law practice. Although Monica was thoroughly investigated, no evidence connected her to the crime. The only suspicious aspects were her initial unwillingness to cooperate and that some of the funds were used to help pay for her law school expenses. Dana Ewell's actions can be summed up by 3 words: greed, entitlement, and heartlessness. His extreme desire for wealth led him to manipulate and betray those closest to him, ultimately leading to the tragic deaths of his family members. On July 4, 2009, several faculty members from the finance department of Chinese University gathered to work overtime. They needed to manage and track the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. Among them was supposed to be 43-year-old Tan Chenghui, a faculty member whom many expected to be present. Yet, he was absent. A colleague known as Ma attempted to reach Chenghui on his mobile phone at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, there was no answer. Given the heavy workload, Ma couldn't get too concerned and initially wasn't worried. He knew that Chenghui's family had recently adopted a stray dog suffering from a skin disease. Chenghui had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma assumed that's where he might have been. On July 5th, the university's finance department held another meeting, but again Chenghui failed to show up. Ma tried calling his mobile phone once more, but still received no response. Not knowing Chenghui's landline number prevented further attempts at contact. By July 6th, Chenghui hadn't shown up for work for 2 days and had not communicated with any co-workers. Eventually, one colleague reported his absence to the university's finance department. Fortunately, his superiors knew Chenghui's house landline number and tried calling it, again with no success. Concerned about his prolonged absence, they reached out to the library where his 33-year-old wife, Tang Anyi, worked. According to library staff, she too was absent without having booked any days off. Originally from Zhongshan, in Guangdong province of mainland China, Chenghui and Tang Anyi were married for 11 years and had 2 daughters, 10-year-old Tan Zai and 7-year-old Tan Zai. Both daughters shared the same name. Although their living conditions were modest, they resided in an abandoned recycling station on Waju South Road. The family was described as kind-hearted and cheerful individuals whose children were well-behaved. Chenghui frequently took his daughters into town for leisure activities, which led some to speculate that perhaps the family decided on an impromptu vacation but encountered unforeseen circumstances delaying their return. This unusual situation called for further investigation and warranted greater concern within their academic community. His colleagues spent a significant period repeatedly calling both his mobile and house phone, hoping for a different outcome. After some time, someone did answer. However, it was not a family member. Instead, an unfamiliar man with a middle-aged voice responded. He introduced himself as Chenghui's cousin, stating that the family had left for Dongduan in Guangdong province for summer vacation. According to him, Chenghui had entrusted his personal phone to him for safekeeping. When asked about the family's return to Hong Kong, the man was vague and eventually hung up after repeated questioning, then turned off the mobile phone. This call only heightened the suspicion and concern among Chenghui's co-workers. Chenghui had always been diligent and conscientious, never leaving work without a valid reason. If he were to take a vacation with his children, he would have arranged matters with their school beforehand. Additionally, the family cared for 9 stray dogs, raising questions about who would look after them during their trip to mainland China and how they could afford such a vacation. Chenghui had lived with his parents. His father was a sailor while his mother worked at a paper mill. His father's mysterious disappearance led to his mother's deteriorating health and eventual move to a nursing home. Chenghui regularly visited her weekly, making it out of character for him to suddenly abandon these responsibilities. Consequently, they decided to contact the police. One of his colleagues guided the police to Chenghui's residence, located at an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. On their way there, they noticed an unexpected event. A short man was seen near the Tan family's fence, but quickly vanished from sight. Initially dismissing this sighting as inconsequential, they proceeded to their destination. Upon reaching Chenghui's home gate, they discovered it locked. The police then surveyed the property and began questioning neighbors. The abandoned recycling station spans nearly 450 square meters, with only 90 square meters constructed upon. Around 350 square meters are unoccupied flower beds. The building itself was illegally constructed. The original owner had haphazardly built several tin houses on the premises for waste recycling purposes, while another stone structure functioned as a pig farm. Given that virtually no one resided there, the police found only one neighbor available for questioning, an elderly woman named Wang, who lived alone across the street. Wang mentioned she had resided in the area for quite some time and knew their daily schedules somewhat, particularly that they usually attended to their garden in the afternoons, but beyond this knowledge, she was not privy to details about their personal lives. She noted that, due to the remote location, relatives seldom visited the family. The only acquaintance she knew of was Cheng Hui's middle-aged cousin, who went by Zhu. Wang was not informed of any mentions of suicide. She only knew that Cheng Hui's uncle lived nearby in a stone house. A colleague of Cheng Hui told the police that when he called Cheng Hui's phone, it was answered by his cousin. The police assumed the person on the other end was Zhu. Wang didn't know Zhu's or the uncle's address, but she did hear cries for help from their house on July 5th. Consequently, officers were dispatched to conduct door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village. Investigators later located a man at a stone house at 74 Huaju Road. He identified himself as 42-year-old Zhu Shenqi and confirmed he was Cheng Hui's cousin. He mentioned that he frequently visited the family home to assist with renovations and garden work. When questioned about the phone call, he insisted that the family was on vacation in China. According to him, Cheng Hui visited his mother at a nursing home on July 5th before returning home and informing him of his plan to travel to Dongguan, China for a few days. To avoid expensive roaming fees for his Hong Kong mobile phone in mainland China, he had asked Zhu Shenqi to keep it until he returned. The person observed by police and Cheng Hui's colleague leaving hurriedly was actually Zhu after feeding the family dogs. Zhu Shenqi appeared calm during his interaction with investigators. There were no notable inconsistencies in his account. When asked if he possessed a key to the family home, he said he did not. Despite locating Zhu Shenqi, police continued their door-to-door investigations. Some villagers claimed that a few days earlier, a stranger had borrowed money from a female villager and later had an intense confrontation where she threatened to collect the debt from Cheng Hui's home if unpaid when his mother was hospitalized since she owed money too. However, this stranger wasn't Zhu Shenqi. Nonetheless, speculation arose suggesting that perhaps the family went into hiding to evade debts and misled their cousin about their whereabouts in China. Or so they thought. When the police asked the villagers about Shenqi, that's when they learned he had lied. The villagers that Shenqi regularly visited the area to maintain and work on the home. He always managed to open the gate and door by himself, even when no one else was home. This led the police to conclude that he must have had a key or some kind access to the property. In fact, he did. Wang witnessed Cheng Hui hand over the key to Shenqi. This key was left at the university office, with instructions for Shenqi to pick it up. Wang also saw this exchange. The police then returned to Shenqi's home and asked for the key. Once again, he denied owning one and claimed he used a spare during renovations, which he supposedly returned, leaving him without access. Shenqi appeared far less composed compared to his previous questioning sessions. He deliberately avoided key details. So when police threatened to search his home, Shenqi panicked and suddenly remembered another house key he hadn't returned. He retrieved it from his dresser and handed it over to the authorities. Despite his suspicious behavior, there wasn't direct evidence linking him to the family's disappearance, so they put him under surveillance while continuing their investigation. Using this spare key, investigators entered the home, which was in complete disarray and had clearly been ransacked. They found several fresh bloodstains on the walls, indicating that someone had likely been killed on the property. In the kitchen, police discovered a sink full of dirty dishes, a clear contradiction to any claim that they had gone to China, as they would not have left their home in such a mess before leaving. Inside the couple's master bedroom, they found family ID cards in a dresser drawer. The head investigator contacted border crossing authorities, who confirmed that no member of the family had left Hong Kong. Continuing their search, they found a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic hollow water pipe in a corner of another room. Sniffer dogs were brought in for further clues. The dogs picked up a scent and found blood stains under freshly turned soil 99 meters away from the house. Despite it being summer vacation, it was known that Cyan and Zion, the daughters, had signed up for summer school classes, meaning they wouldn't be on vacation either. It became clear that foul play was involved concerning what happened to this family. Soon after, a dedicated task force was created specifically for investigating this case, but no further investigation took place immediately due to how late it was, so authorities just cordoned off Pingchi village's entrances and exits, while placing Shenki under house arrest as their primary suspect. Shenki soon admitted his actions. He stated he was from Huangpu, Guangdong province. He lived with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and who suffered from memory issues. Shenki previously made a living through motorcycle sales in Junction City. However, the 2006 ban on motorcycles in Guangdong affected his sales and income drastically. Struggling financially, he reached out to his cousin, Tan Changi, in Hong Kong for assistance in finding work there. Shang Hui managed to secure Shenki a construction job that paid a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars with board and lodging included. After working for half a month, Shenki felt frustrated with his pay since company deductions left him with only 220 Hong Kong dollars. Annoyed and dispirited, he quit without notice and went back to China. In 2007, Typhoon Pabuk caused extensive damage to his home. Faced with hefty repair costs, Shenki sought employment help from Cheng Hui in Hong Kong again. This time, Shang Hui couldn't find available jobs but offered to pay Shenki from his own salary if Shenki helped work on Hui's home. Shenki accepted the offer. Under this deal, every other month, Shenki would travel to Hong Kong for various tasks around the household like gardening and repairs. As per Shenki's account, an affair began between him and Cheng Hui's wife during this period. On July 3rd, Cheng Hui discovered the affair. On July 5th, while visiting a nursing home with Cheng Hui's wife to see her mother-in-law, Shenki snuck back home to continue the affair. Cheng Hui unexpectedly returned early and furiously confronted him. According to Shenki, seeing murderous intent in Cheng Hui's eyes drove him to desperation. He grabbed a 25-centimeter fruit knife and fatally stabbed Cheng Hui repeatedly until he fell into a pool of blood. Shenki was understandably frightened by what had just occurred and intended to report it to the authorities. Nevertheless, Shenki mentioned he couldn't allow that to transpire, so since he couldn't convince Cheng Hui's wife, he resolved to eliminate her as well. He located some wires in the room's corner, rushed at her, knocked her down, bound her hands behind her back, her mouth and nose with tape, and a plastic bag over her head. Meanwhile, their 2 children were in a bedroom watching cartoons. She screamed for them to flee, but instead, they ran towards their mother and found their father deceased and Shenki in the process of killing their mother. They retreated to their room, crying and locking the door. Given she was already restrained, Shenki left Cheng Hui's wife momentarily and pursued the children. Their cries were overheard by a neighbor. Using a pair of pliers, Shenki forced open the door and tied their hands behind their backs with wires too, taped over their mouths and noses, and covered their heads with plastic bags as well. Returning to Cheng Hui's wife after securing the children, who also soon suffocated, he found she had finally stopped breathing. After killing the entire family, Shenki was uncertain about his next steps. He went back home to ponder his options. Shenki considered that hiding the bodies in a ditch or water might make them too easily discoverable, and that dismembering them would be very taxing and time-consuming. He decided on burying them on their own property instead. On July 6th, Shenki returned to the house intending to clean up as many bloodstains as possible before digging a hole deep and wide enough for 4 bodies. He quickly placed all 4 family members inside it, along with the murder tools. Sharp knife, water pipe, iron pliers, then covered it all up. The police were skeptical about his motives but believed his account overall. They escorted Shenki back to the scene where he identified for them where he'd buried everything used for committing these crimes. On July 7th, they contacted the fire department for assistance with exhuming the remains. The firefighters arrived equipped with excavation tools and wore gas masks since the bodies were near a septic tank. They commenced digging but soon encountered an issue. They hit cement. Shanky, during his confession, omitted a key detail. He had filled the pit with cement before covering it back up. The thickness of the cement was unknown, and it had hardened, rendering their tools ineffective in breaking through. Consequently, the police brought in a private engineering company. This company utilized high-grade tools to begin drilling through the concrete. However, the engineering team had weak stomachs. Upon drilling through and discovering human hair, they lost their nerve and refused to continue, as they did not wish to see a dead body. The police took 13 hours to convince them to proceed. Once fully excavated, they found the pit measured 2.54 meters wide and 6 feet deep. At the bottom lay the 4 bodies of the family members, barefoot and clad in just t-shirts and shorts. Cheng Hui's body was at the very bottom, with his hands and feet bound by electric wire and multiple stab wounds on his abdomen, back and neck. His clothes were stained with blood. And Enzio's knees, hands, and feet were also tied up with electric wire. A wire was wrapped around her neck, while her mouth and nose were sealed with yellow tape. Zion's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, her face appeared distorted. Similarly, Xiaowang's face was contorted, her hands and feet were tied up, her mouth and nose sealed, her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Both Enzio and Enzio displayed no overt signs of trauma, leading police to believe they might have been buried alive. Shanky was formally arrested and during interrogation altered his confession. He retracted his initial claim about an affair but admitted attempting to initiate one. And Enzio felt uncomfortable and informed Cheng Hui about Shanky's behavior. Enraged, Cheng Hui expelled Shanky from their home and prohibited him from returning. Subsequently, Shanky revisited the home to apologize, surprisingly receiving Cheng Hui's forgiveness. On July 3rd, Shanky resumed work at their home when it appeared that their relationship had mended until July 4th, when he again made advances towards Enzio during Cheng Hui's absence. Attempting to escalate this time by trying to molest Enzio, Enzio led her to flee and call for help as she locked herself in a room for safety, to avoid alarming neighbors. In response, and likely panic, Shanky fled the scene in anger. On July 5th, Shanky waited for Cheng Hui to visit his mother at the nursing home. His intention was to force his way into the family home once more, under the pretense of delivering a second apology. Cheng Hui, anticipating such an attempt, wisely returned home early. Upon arrival, he found Shanky on the property, attempting to gain entry to speak with Enzio again. This encounter quickly escalated into an argument. In a heated, Shanky stabbed Cheng Hui, not in self-defense but voluntarily. The remainder of Shanky's confession aligned with his initial statements, but included the added detail of filling the makeshift grave with cement. Yet, after the bodies were examined during autopsy, it became evident that Shanky's accounts were incomplete. Cheng Hui's murder was far more savage than described. He had sustained 9 stab wounds to his head and neck, and nearly 80 on his body. Additionally, there were 10 stab wounds on his hands and feet. Rather than being suffocated with a plastic bag as initially claimed, both Cheng Hui and Zion had been strangled. Forensic analysis of the home revealed that none of the cutlery or dishes held the family's DNA. Instead, they bore only Shanky's DNA. It was concluded that Cheng Hui had not been murdered in the kitchen but likely elsewhere in the house. Enzio did not become aware of these events until she herself was attacked by Shanky next. Furthermore, the weapon used was not from the family's kitchen but one belonging to Shanky himself. The cement used for concealing the bodies had been purchased ahead of time, indicating forethought and planning. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Enzio's bank cards had been used at ATMs following her death. However, failed attempts to guess her PIN prevented any money from being withdrawn. Moreover, their cash and bank cards were discovered missing, pointing towards robbery as a motive and solidifying premeditation. Throughout this process, whenever discrepancies in his story were highlighted by police officers, Shanky swiftly provided new versions of events. He explained that urgent repairs were needed for his ancestral home in China, amounting to 100,000 in cash, while maintaining financial support for two children still at school there as well, both which necessitated significant funds. Because he lacked local favorability back home, it meant borrowing money would likely be denied, and visits previously made to Hong Kong hadn't yielded substantial earnings either. Hence, ultimately turning towards seeking assistance from Cheng Hui seemed like necessary recourse under such pressing circumstances, according to him. Shanky harbored the belief that Cheng Mi was far wealthier than he seemed and was exploited for cheap labor. On July 3rd, Shanky returned to Hong Kong without informing anyone. He waited until July 5th, when the couple didn't have to work. Concealing a knife, Shanky knocked on the door while Cheng Hui was away at the nursing home. They talked briefly. When Cheng Hui returned and saw Shanky, he asked if there was anything he needed. As they conversed, Annie went to the kitchen. Almost immediately, Shanky asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Cheng Hui declined because, although he had the money, and even more, he needed it for his mother's treatment and daughter's education. Shanky refused to believe him and accused him of exploiting him for cheap labor. This accusation angered Cheng Hui, who then ordered Shanky to leave. As Cheng Hui turned his back, Shanky attacked him, covering his mouth before stabbing him from behind. He then restrained a terrified Ani and Jiang Wang, searched the home for cash and bank cards, and demanded their passwords. Although Cheng Hui provided a fake password, at that moment, Shanky didn't realize it. Despite this lie about strangling Annie and claiming he killed them by putting tape over their mouths and noses, as well as using plastic bags over their heads, this part being untrue, when Shanky left for the nearest ATM, he found out he had been lied to when the PIN number didn't work. Upon his return home, he discovered they had all suffocated in his absence. Noticing the food Ani had been preparing, he decided to eat it near the four corpses while contemplating how to dispose of them. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Cheng Hui's person, he buried the bodies and tools in a small pit before retiring to sleep at his temporary residence. The next morning, he awoke with the grim realization that the bodies might be detected due to the smell seeping from the soil. So he decided to buy cement from a store. After returning home, he dug up the pit he had previously made and poured in the cement before refilling the hole again. He planned to stay at the house for a while to answer calls to Cheng Hui's cell phone or house phone, pretending that he was asked to look after things while they were supposedly on vacation. Shanky mentioned he did not anticipate his deception being uncovered so quickly. Even now, Shanky continued lying about various details, such as claiming he bought the cement before the murder and fabricating causes of Annie and Jiang's deaths. The police, by this point, were no longer interested in extracting a truthful confession, since they felt they had sufficient evidence to proceed. The trial took place at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010. Shanky pleaded not guilty. Maintaining his earlier story about an affair with Annie, he asserted that Cheng Hui was killed in self-defense and claimed Annie and Jiang died accidentally. According to him, he only confessed to extorting the family and killing them for financial reasons because he was coerced by police through beatings and suffocation until he surrendered the confession they wanted. On November 23rd, the jury delivered their verdict, unanimously finding him guilty of murdering Cheng Hui while acquitting him of Jiang's murder but convicting him of manslaughter instead. On this charge, the jury split 5-2. This distinction proved inconsequential because Shanky received a life sentence for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The presiding judge condemned Shanky's lack of conscience, calling him worse than a beast and unrepentant. He accused Shanky of concocting both his self-defense tale and affair with Annie solely to tarnish their reputations posthumously, rather than secure a reduced sentence. Interestingly, despite widespread condemnation, Shanky's family sided with him. They accused Cheng Hui of being hypocritical, a true villain who exploited Shanky financially by pocketing his earnings and using him for cheap labor. These claims sparked outrage among Pingqi village residents, leading Shanky's family to move back to China to escape backlash. This crime was among Hong Kong's most shocking incidents. It spurred an outpouring of support toward Cheng Hui's family, as many visited their home offering condolences, while netizens raised ample funds for funeral expenses. The family's 9 stray dogs also found new homes when another family adopted them, each year on July 5th. They would take these dogs for walks near their former owner's residence in Ping Chi Village as tribute. On August 9, 2022, at age 55, Shanky passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison due to liver cancer. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano's story began quite harmlessly. She was receiving attention from a work colleague which she consistently ignored. She sincerely hoped that her admirer would soon understand and just leave her alone. However, one careless action by Celeste drastically changed everything, turning her suitor into an obsessed pursuer. Another thoughtless act led to irreversible consequences. Celeste Cristano was born on November 30th, 1997, in the northeastern part of Melbourne in Victoria State, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to parents Eggy Darrow and Tony Mano. She grew up alongside her older brother named Alessandro. According to some accounts, their father left his wife when the children were still small and soon remarried. However, he always maintained contact with his older offspring, supported them financially, and tried to be actively involved in their lives. During her school years, Celeste was quite sociable, active, and friendly. She engaged in sports and dance, served as the captain of the cheerleading team, and had big plans for her future. Initially, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer and enrolled in the prestigious University of Melbourne, studying criminal and civil law. However, towards the end of her studies, she found law dull and began studying advertising and marketing. In 2018, she was hired by a large and rapidly growing company that sold various goods on e-commerce platforms. Smart and talented, Celeste quickly grasped everything on the fly. She successfully fulfilled her duties and rapidly ascended the career ladder. From a simple call center worker, she became the head of an entire department in less than 2 years. Considered one of the most promising employees, everyone admired her intelligence, initiative, and ability to organize work competently. Moreover, Celeste possessed outstanding external attributes and a flawless figure. During her university years, she even participated in the university beauty contest and was among the top 3 leaders. She always had many admirers from a young age, but was meticulous in choosing partners. Among her colleagues was Liu Sako. He worked at the company nearly 16 years older than her and showed a lively interest in Celeste from her first days at the office. Worth noting is that Liu Sako was quite reserved and unsociable, evidently lacking career ambitions, as he long occupied the same minor position without desire for development. Kind, smiling, and open, Celeste did not want to hurt Liu Sako's feelings, so she always politely declined whenever he tried asking her out. Despite this, Liu repeatedly attempted to draw her attention in various ways. Sometimes Celeste would make jokes to lighten the mood, but firmly desired nothing to do with him. His attentions were persistent and awkwardly annoying, but keeping composure, Celeste hoped he would soon give up or shift his focus elsewhere as time passed. Liu Sako remained relentless, becoming almost obsessed with the young beauty, Celeste Mano. Everyone around him noticed it. One day, Celeste confided in a close colleague that she wouldn't ever consider a relationship with Liu. First, he was odd and unpredictable. Second, she never felt any attraction towards men who lacked ambition and life goals. Third, the significant age gap also played a role. Nonetheless, she did pity him because despite all his efforts, he stood no chance. Unfortunately, Liu Sako lost focus on his work in his fruitless attempts to win Celeste's attention and affection. Historically, he was a very hard-working employee, but now he completely ignored his job duties and his productivity suffered greatly. Senior management was unhappy with this drop in performance. Lewis was given 3 reprimands and warnings. In early autumn of 2019, the company ultimately fired him for his negligence. Liu Sako was very upset by this turn of events. As he packed up his things at the office, it seemed he was about to cry. Celeste experienced mixed feelings. On one hand, she felt relieved that he would disappear from her life and stop bothering her with persistent overtures. But on the other hand, she felt some guilt believing his dismissal partly happened because of her. As a department manager, Celeste thanked Louis for his years of service and escorted him to the building exit. She tried to encourage him with a pat on the shoulder and sincerely wished him luck as they parted ways. However, it turned out this harmless act was a mistake, a catalyst that fueled Louis's belief they could make their relationship work. Instantly, Louis decided that Celeste was simply afraid to start an office romance since she was his boss and feared general disapproval or damage to her career. Now convinced nothing stood in the way of their potential happiness together, Louis, overwhelmed by his emotions, unexpectedly kissed Celeste on the cheek. An awkward pause ensued. Stunned by his audacity, Celeste didn't know how to react, so she just turned around and hurried back into the office building without saying anything. This reaction further convinced Louis that Celeste harbored feelings for him and believed he should not give up pursuing her. Just days after, Louis created a social media account, found Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. At first, she accepted it, thinking no harm would come of it. But when he started bombarding her with requests to meet up and go out together, she tried to decline politely. Eventually, she just blocked him. The following day, the former colleague sent another friend request from a newly created profile. Celeste tried to ignore it. However, he began commenting on her photos, praising her looks, and mentioning how great they would be as a couple. She then adjusted her profile settings so only friends could send her messages or comment on her photos or posts. A week later, during a family gathering, she mentioned the persistent pursuer to her relatives. She also recounted the strange incident from the day he was fired. Her family listened but assumed it wasn't serious, and that the unwanted admirer would lose interest and disappear from her life soon. Louis didn't have Celeste's personal phone number while they worked together. They only communicated through work channels. But now Celeste began receiving peculiar romantic messages from an unknown number. She quickly guessed who they were from. The admirer sent romantic poems he had written, praised her beauty again, and tried to convince her to meet up. Celeste answered his call only once in an attempt to have a serious conversation with him. She explained that nothing could happen between them and tried to persuade him to stop pursuing her. Nevertheless, he didn't listen. Instead, he just complimented how pleasant her voice was and expressed how glad he was that she had finally picked up. After this conversation, she tried blocking him again, but each time he'd call from a new number. Eventually, she decided to change her own number. Still within a week or so later, Louis managed to find it out and continued his telephone harassment. Seeking some form of protection for about half a year, Celeste kept unsuccessful attempts at ignoring the crazed admirer. She blocked his numbers and fake social media pages, but he persisted with messages and continually disrupted her usual life. The stream of messages continued, and over time, their nature shifted from romantic to bold and threatening. The man stopped asking politely. He began demanding meetings and detailing his delusional, intimate fantasies about what he intended to do with her immediately. However, that wasn't the worst of it. It became evident that the stalker began following her from work to home, where she lived. Celeste didn't initially realize that Louis was now present in her life beyond just the messages. He was literally tracking her every move. She occasionally glimpsed him near her home, but convinced herself each time that it was merely a product of nerves or imagination. When she finally understood that she was not mistaken and that Louis, with his obsessive behavior, was indeed following her, she decided to seek police protection. Celeste wanted law enforcement to issue a special order prohibiting the stalker from approaching her and her home. However, the officers were indifferent, even mocking at times. According to them, writing poems or expressing explicit fantasies in text messages is neither illegal nor punishable. Since Celeste couldn't provide evidence of Lue following her and lurking near her home, they simply asked her to leave the precinct and not hinder them from catching real criminals. For another 6 months, Celeste continued to endure relentless harassment from her former colleague. During workdays, she frequently noticed his car parked across the street from her office. In the evenings, he would drive past her house several times. She constantly felt his gaze on her, increasing her anxiety and making daily life tense. In August 2020, Celeste approached the police again. This time, she provided photo and video evidence on her phone, showing that Lue was indeed following her. A different officer took her statement this time, an officer who took the situation more seriously and expressed surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised her to immediately go to court, where a restraining order was issued against Lue. He was notified that he could no longer call, approach her, or try to contact her in any other way. Clearly, the man did not expect this turn of events and indeed disappeared from Celeste's sight for a few weeks. She was happy for the first time in a while. She felt free and believed that the harasser would no longer bother her. However, her relief was premature. Less than a month later, she began receiving messages from unknown numbers. Initially, Lue pleaded and then demanded she retract her statement and remove the restraining order, as he believed it interfered with their romantic relationship. After receiving several messages, Celeste immediately went to the police, since her pursuer had violated the restraining order. Now, he had to face the consequences. The man was fined and warned that further violations could lead to much more severe measures. If he didn't leave the young woman alone, he could end up in jail. After this incident, Lue did not make his presence known for almost 2 months. The young woman believed he had finally left her alone. In September 2020, Celeste met a young man named Chris Reedsdale. He was just a year older than her, and they quickly found they had many common interests, views on life, and goals. Consequently, a romantic relationship soon developed between them. She told her new boyfriend about the harassment from her former admirer and confessed that although Lue had not appeared, she still felt anxious. Chris endeavored to surround his girlfriend with care and attention, doing everything to make her feel safe and worry-free. In early November, Celeste invited Chris to a family dinner to introduce him to her parents and brother. Celeste's choice was well received by her family. They quickly hit it off, and her mother even jested that her daughter was now in safe hands. The following weeks passed peacefully, with no sign of the former admirer, who did not attempt to contact Celeste. The young woman found joy in spending all her free time with Chris. It appeared she no longer worried about Lue possibly barging back into her life or causing her any harm. On November 15, 2020, the love-struck couple decided to go out on a date. They sat in a cafe, enjoying each other's company. During this pleasant moment, the young woman suggested they capture it by taking a selfie. The photo turned out very romantic. They were sitting at the same table, embracing, smiling, and looking genuinely happy. Celeste was so fond of this picture that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media. In doing so, she aimed to share the news of her new relationship and indicate how serious things were between them. Chris also posted the photo on his page with a touching caption about how much he loved Celeste and how he would do everything to keep her eyes sparkling with happiness as depicted in the picture. Unfortunately, this outing would be their last as a couple. On the evening of their final date, Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, and they said goodbye with plans to meet again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen talking with her mother about her boyfriend before heading to bed, since she had to get up early for work the next morning. On Monday, November 16, 2020, around 4 a.m., Eggy was awakened by the sound of breaking glass but didn't immediately grasp what was happening. Then there were suspicious noises. Banging, screams, and commotion followed. At first, it seemed like these noises were coming from outside on the street. However, she soon realized they were emanating from within the house. Eggy leapt out of bed, threw on a robe, and rushed to her daughter's room. She flung open the door and in the dim light saw someone literally jumping away from Celeste's bed before escaping through a broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Her daughter lay in a pool of her own blood, covered in cuts and small shards of broken glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide open, staring upward. Immediately, her mother called emergency services and tried to stem the deep bleeding wounds on her daughter's body until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, it was too late. By the time police doctors got there, she had already passed away. The medical examiners later found over 20 penetrating stab wounds on her body, with the fatal blow aimed at her heart. During the investigation, the prime suspect was scrutinized. Analyzing the situation and comparing it with Eggy's testimony, police concluded that the assailant took less than 3 minutes to break into the victim's room through the window and carry out the attack before her mother entered. The suspect used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly, while Celeste tried to defend herself as indicated by numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if her daughter had any enemies, Eggy could only recall one name: Louis Sacco. He had obsessively pursued the young woman for over a year, harassing her with calls and threatening messages. This information was corroborated by other family members as well as friends and colleagues. At the scene, the suspect left many bloody fingerprints, and DNA was found on a fence he jumped over while fleeing since he had injured his hand. It became imperative to detain and interrogate Louis immediately as the prime suspect to verify and compare all evidence and witness statements. Louis was arrested that same day, but initially vehemently denied his involvement in the incident. He insisted that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. Forensic results later confirmed the bloody fingerprints found in the victim's room and on the fence to him. Law enforcement also highlighted the restraining order against approaching the young woman, which he had violated. Additionally, on the evening before the tragedy, it was discovered that Louis had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store. This transaction was captured on surveillance cameras at the checkout. Louis used the hammer to break into the house through a window and then used the knife in his fatal attack on the unfortunate woman. A calculated criminal or a man in need of treatment. The evidence against Sacco was undeniable, further underscored by his long-term surveillance of the victim, knowing practically everything about her. The final trigger for him appeared to be a photo posted by the young woman on social media with her new boyfriend. After seeing this, he went to a store, bought a knife and hammer, and under cover of night, went to Celeste's home to end her life. His actions were seen as calculated and premeditated criminal activity. Yet Louis's behavior was quite erratic, raising questions about his mental stability. Notably, at nearly 39 years old, he had never married, continued living with his parents, had almost no friends, and never held a job for long periods. People described him as nervous and introverted with severe socialization issues. Additionally, Louis had a biological brother serving a lengthy sentence for another criminal act at that time. Following these events, a forensic psychiatric evaluation was ordered for Louis, with his attorney insisting that his client required specialized treatment instead of imprisonment. This argument angered and upset the victim's family, who feared that this cruel individual might evade punishment. After interviewing Louis and analyzing his behavior, psychiatric experts concluded he did indeed suffer from some mental disorders. However, and it's important, they determined that at the time of the crime he was fully aware of his actions. Furthermore, he had meticulously planned the crime in advance, carefully considering the details. As a result, despite his efforts to feign insanity, Sacco would inevitably face a trial. The trial and subsequent sentencing did not occur until the autumn of 2023, 3 years after the tragic death of the young woman. During this period, the criminal made several attempts to demonstrate his mental illness, hoping to avoid conviction for deliberate criminal acts. He spent most of this time in a psychiatric facility. In the courtroom, Louis appeared calm and detached, showing little interest in the proceedings. Although he admitted his guilt, he maintained that his intention was not to take the girl's life, but to win her affection. However, the jury unanimously found Louis guilty on all charges. He was then sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 30 years. Celeste's law, which ultimately was not passed, aimed to address the fact that existing laws did not consider online stalking and phone harassment as criminal offenses. The parents of Celeste highlighted that their daughter had sought police protection as early as 2020, but her complaint was not taken seriously due to the limitations of the current legislation. Over the 3-year period leading up to the trial, the mother of the deceased young woman, along with legal experts and activists, collaborated to develop Celeste's law. This law sought to establish criminal accountability for online stalking through social media platforms, text messages, and emails. The hope was that such a law would provide protection for countless women and girls, preventing similar tragedies from occurring. Despite these efforts, the investigations revealed that most online stalkers remained covert and did not attempt any direct contact with their victims. The amendments made to the legislation primarily focused on restricting access to personal information on social media platforms. In cases involving severe stalking with threats, a restraining order could be issued, similar to real-life scenarios. Nevertheless, there remained a lack of criminal accountability for such crimes. Currently, a stalker might only receive a verbal warning for their actions, and in cases of repeated violations, they could face fines, but not always. The enactment of Celeste's law, with its proposed changes, remains pending. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Smith family. On July 5, 2005, around 8 a.m. on Deck 7, in one of the cabins of the Royal Caribbean cruise ship, 16-year-old Emily Rausch of Chicago was preparing for a new sunny day. Outside her cabin window, Emily noticed something strange that caused her alarm. She saw what appeared to be blood smeared across the canopy that served as a cover for the nearby lifeboat. She also saw a blood stain near the very edge of the canopy, as if someone who had been injured had fallen there before disappearing overboard. Emily could not remain indifferent to this discovery and hastened to report the strange sighting to the staff of the liner. George Smith was a cheerful, inquisitive, and bright young man. He was born in the small town of Greenwich, Connecticut, and his childhood was a happy one, filled with the joy and support of his family, which came first for George. He always maintained a close relationship with his parents and his sister, Bree. His father, George Smith Sr., owned a liquor store and ran it himself. The family business was not just a job for him, but a true passion. In 2000, the younger George Smith successfully completed his higher education in business at Babson College, which is located in Massachusetts. After graduation, he worked for several years in Boston as a computer data mining analyst. However, his heart has always belonged to the family business. After making an informed decision, George decided to return home to help his parents run the store under his father's guidance. He was going to learn the ins and outs of the family business so that he could take over the store in the future and allow his parents to enjoy a well-deserved vacation. In 2002, at one of his reunions with friends, George Smith met a girl who became his life partner. Jennifer was also a Connecticut native and had just received a job offer as an elementary school teacher. She was bright, beautiful, and ambitious, just like George himself. The young couple were completely infatuated with each other, and George's parents were also delighted with his chosen partner. 3 years later, in 2005, when George was 26 years old, the couple decided to get married and start a new chapter of their lives. They celebrated their wedding at the Castle Hill Inn, located in the picturesque town of Newport, Rhode Island, and the ceremony itself took place on the ocean front. It was a location perfect for such an important event in their lives. Immediately after the ceremony, the newlyweds went on a honeymoon, choosing a cruise on a luxury liner, one of the grand ships of the Royal Caribbean Fleet. The 12-day tour involved sailing the beautiful waters of the Asian Sea. Their journey began in Barcelona on June 29th and included stops along the French Riviera and the Italian coastline. George and Jennifer soon befriended another couple and a young man named Josh Asen from California. The 20-year-old Josh, a man with a lively sense of humor, quickly won over George's friendship, and the lively group enjoyed spending time together. On the 1st of July, when the cruise ship departed the Italian coast, they decided to go ashore and have fun all day. On July 4th, the young people explored the island, walked through the narrow streets of the old town, swam in the crystal-clear sea, and savored the local cuisine and cozy taverns. Happy and cheerful, they relished each other's company and the enchanting ambiance of this beautiful place. Mykonos left indelible memories in their hearts, and they planned to continue the evening's enjoyment together on the deck of the ship after a romantic dinner. George and Jennifer met up with their friends again on the cruise ship. The merry group decided to come together and have an enjoyable, memorable experience in this exotic part of the world. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement. After indulging in delicious appetizers and drinks, the newly married couple, accompanied by Josh Askin, went to have fun at the casino on the ship. George and Josh enjoyed sitting at the craps table, and they were entertained during the game, while Jennifer played at the poker table. By the end of the evening, the newlyweds had lost a considerable amount of money. Without regret, they joked about the loss, as it was their honeymoon after all. After the casino closed, apparently the friends decided to continue their night out. The last video of George was recorded around 2:30 a.m. on one of the liner's many security cameras. The footage showed him leaving the casino, but that did not mean George would return to his cabin. In the early morning hours of June 5, 2005, on the Greek island of Mykonos, a mysterious plot began to unfold. George Smith, a 26-year-old newlywed who was on a Mediterranean cruise with his wife Jennifer, disappeared last night. George was reportedly having an active time enjoying the liner's atmosphere of fun and luxury. Everything seemed harmless that night, but the sequel turned out to be much darker. The captain of the ship examined the cabin under the window of which strange footprints had been found, as well as the place on the deck. There was no one in the cabin, and the available footprints and evidence indicated that something serious had happened. The possible disappearance of the newlyweds was related to violence. The news quickly reached all the liner visitors. There was alarm aboard the ship, and passengers were disturbed by the strange events. Deck 7 was cordoned off, and no one was let in or out of their cabins. The ship's crew thoroughly checked every possible establishment on the liner in hopes of finding the missing George and Jennifer. After the discovery of blood, the newlyweds were presumed to have mysteriously disappeared. Taking the situation into his own hands, the senior officer headed to their stateroom to get to the bottom of what was going on. From all available traces, it was hypothesized that George might have fallen overboard the ship. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, the search for the young couple was still going on. By 10 a.m., Jennifer was found in the ship's spa, where she was having a pre-booked massage session. Her facial expression spoke of deep surprise and concern. She claimed to be unaware of her husband's whereabouts and that she had not seen him since the previous night. Jennifer revealed that when she woke up this morning, her husband wasn't there. At first, it did not seem unusual to her because he had spent the night with friends, and in the morning he was in another cabin, so she did not search for her husband but went for a spa treatment without being bothered by his absence. At noon, Turkish authorities arrived on board to begin an investigation. The ship's captain reassured the anxious passengers and announced that the abnormal events required cooperation with local authorities. He emphasized that it was a necessary measure to clarify the circumstances and expressed hope that the situation would be resolved soon. The police officers began their questioning with the missing man's wife, Jennifer. Her agitated state and apparent lack of information about her husband made her the main suspect. She said that she had not seen George since the previous night, and that men in white uniforms from the Royal Caribbean had shown up at her door, announcing that her husband may have fallen overboard the ship. They also noticed traces of blood on the boat's awning, after which there was no room for doubt that something terrible had happened to George. Investigators scrutinized cabin 962 on the cruise ship. This cabin was a mess, perhaps the result of a hurried search or even a struggle in the bathroom. Small drops of blood were found on the carpet and towel, and there were fingerprints on the balcony railing. Turkish investigators also found 2 small blood stains on the bedding, each about 2 centimeters long. These samples were identified, and the blood belonged to George. All evidence indicated that George had been traumatized inside the cabin before his mysterious disappearance. The investigators' attention was drawn to a chair on the balcony that had been moved, allowing someone to sit next to the railing. Marks on the railing suggested that someone had sat on it. This raised suspicion among many, including the ship's captain, that George might have fallen from the balcony. However, the height of the railing and the presence of blood on the boat's awning and inside the cabin also raised suspicion of a murder that had occurred. Investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events that night, trying to figure out who George was spending time with and what might have led to this tragedy. The investigation was just beginning, but it was already obvious that they were facing a complex and dark story full of mysteries and unexpected twists and turns. When the Turkish authorities entered the ship to begin investigating the disappearance of George Smith, they decided to start by questioning the company of boys with whom the newlyweds had spent time the previous night. The situation remained mysterious, and every detail could be important in solving the mystery. Members of the company revealed that George and Jennifer had consumed an excessive amount of alcohol on the tragic night. According to them, George was heavily intoxicated, and they assisted him in returning to his cabin, where they put him to bed, removed his shoes, and left him alone. They also reported that they were unable to locate Jennifer and assumed that she had returned to the cabin at a later time. However, there are several inconsistencies in Josh Askin's testimony. Specifically, he claimed that he saw Jennifer leave with a casino employee named Lloyd. Josh believed they had a passionate connection and did not hide their feelings even in George's presence. But video footage showed that at 3:30 a.m., Jennifer stumbled away, leaving George with her new friends, and Lloyd's keycard data indicated he returned to his cabin at 3:25 a.m., which was confirmed by his girlfriend, whom he woke up upon entering the cabin. These discrepancies raised further questions for investigators and led them to believe that Josh Askin may have had his own motives for withholding important details. The investigation continued, and each new detail added more and more mystery to the story. Greg Rosenberg, a young man of 19, was enjoying a cruise on a minor with his family and friends. In this company were his cousin Zach Rosenberg and a close friend, Rostislav Kaufman. All three, despite their Russian roots, held American passports and lived in New York City. Things began in the casino, where Jennifer and Greg Rosenberg decided to try their luck at poker. The mutual gambling lasted until late at night, and when the casino closed at 2:30 a.m., the group of guys decided to continue the fun together. They headed to the disco, continuing to dance and enjoy alcohol. Lloyd Botha, the casino manager, was also spotted in their company. He joined in the fun as the young men continued their nightly entertainment. Next, the events of the night, as described by the witnesses, begin to diverge as the individual members of the group gradually disperse and return to their cabins. By this time, it was already late at night, and they were visibly intoxicated and rowdy. According to the rules of order on the ship, it was decided to deny service to those who were being loud and behaving inappropriately. When the staff of the liner refused to serve the 2 drunken visitors, the young people recalled that they had purchased a bottle of absinthe during their walk on the island of Mykonos. However, Crews and passengers were forbidden from consuming their own alcohol at a certain point. At a certain point, Josh returns to his cabin, which was on the same deck, to retrieve a special bottle of absinthe that he said he had plans for. As it later turns out, the absinthe was unusually strong, with an alcohol concentration of over 70%, making it one of the strongest drinks available. George decides to help his friend and hides the bottle behind the waistband of his shorts. After 3 in the morning, when the ocean liner had already become completely quiet, an attentive janitor noticed something unusual. A group of young men, including Greg, Zach, Rostislav, Josh, and George, were drinking their bottle of absinthe. This circumstance did not go unnoticed, and it became another element in the investigation. However, it wasn't just the men who were drunk that evening. Jennifer, who had initially appeared relatively sober and calm, began to exhibit noticeable changes in her behavior as the evening progressed. She started to stagger, and at one point, even leaned on the casino manager, Lloyd. The witnesses had varying interpretations of her actions. Some believed she was trying to maintain her balance, while others perceived it as flirtatious behavior. The subsequent events between the young couple also remain unclear. According to the witnesses, there was a conflict between the couple. It is possible that they were simply discussing the previous evening, either jokingly or seriously, but at some point, Jennifer struck George. However, it is unclear whether this was done in a playful manner or out of anger. After that, Jennifer left the disco around 3:30 a.m., appearing intoxicated and unsteady on her feet, leaving George with his new friends. This was a pivotal moment that night. The testimony of staff witnesses proved crucial in uncovering the details of the incident. Jennifer, walking and staggering down the hallway, drew the attention of the janitor, who had earlier observed the young men consuming absinthe. He provided her assistance, helped her to the elevator, and watched her turn right when she reached her deck. However, there was a peculiar discrepancy. Her stateroom was on the left, but she headed in the opposite direction. Jennifer was later found sleeping in the hallway, far from her room. 2 guards and a female duty officer used a wheelchair to get her back to her quarters. When they got there, the clock was already showing 4:52 a.m., but George wasn't there. The curtains on the balcony doors were drawn tightly, and they remained stationary even with the breeze. This raised questions. Was George able to go out to the balcony on his own after his new friends left him in bed? Deputy Chief of Police Chit Heyman and his wife were resting in a nearby cabin and witnessed the unfolding events. The couple had been asleep for some time, but around 4 a.m., they were suddenly awakened by a noise on their floor. They first heard loud noises from stateroom number 9062, where the newlyweds were staying. Chit Heyman immediately called guest services to report the noise. He also pounded on the wall and yelled to his neighbors, which resulted in a brief silence. Then there was loud talking again, lasting about 3 minutes, and suddenly there was a loud argument on the balcony. Chit and his wife heard someone say, "Good night," several times, as if trying to get people to leave the cabin. This was followed by sounds of moving furniture and finally a loud thud, like an object falling. Chit Heyman decided to investigate and open the door. He saw 3 unidentified men. Other passengers also reported hearing loud noises, like a body hitting the boat's canopy, followed by a woman's scream, but none of the eyewitnesses had definitive proof that a woman was in the cabin at the time. According to witnesses, 4 young men entered the cabin, but only 3 were visible as they exited. The question arose, could one of them have stayed inside, trying to steal money from the newlyweds, who may have had winnings from gambling in the casino? The theory about a failed robbery attempt seems the most plausible. However, there are alibis for the 3 men, Greg, Zach, and Rostislav, who were allegedly in another stateroom just minutes after Chit Heyman saw the 3 unknown men. The key card records for George's stateroom confirmed that the boys entered it at 4:05 a.m. according to their testimony, and that they entered the cabin again was not recorded. Thus, there are several theories as to what may have happened to George Smith. Theory 1. Robbery. The theory of a possible robbery represents one of the main ones. By all appearances, George and Jennifer got drunk fairly quickly that night, but from witnesses' observations, they looked more or less sober when they left the casino at 2:30 in the morning. At 3:30 a.m., however, they were no longer able to return to their cabin on their own, suggesting possible exposure to illegal substances. This theory is supported by the testimony of other casino visitors who claim that George and Jennifer spoke openly about having large sums of money, possibly received as wedding gifts or casino winnings. Different witnesses mentioned different amounts, but they all estimated their wealth to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Of course, they could have been victims of a robbery. George wore an expensive Breitling watch, and Jennifer owned an expensive engagement ring, which indicated that they were wealthy. Maybe their quarters were turned over looking for that money. The traces of blood on the sheet could probably have come from the kidnapper's attempt to remove George's valuable watch from his wrist. The second theory of events is related to the effects of alcohol and hallucinogens. The captain, upon learning of the drunkenness of the passengers and the footprints on the balcony, concluded that there may have been an unintentional accident, and for example, during the scuffle, George fell overboard. Particular attention is paid to the question of the presence of hallucinations and their potential danger due to the ingestion of absinthe. Experts in the field of toxicology emphasize that everything depends on the concentration of the active substance. Today, this drink is available for sale in many European countries, and its concentration is significantly limited by European Union regulations. This means that in officially sold absinthe, the concentration of thujone is so low that it is not capable of causing hallucinations. However, illegally made absinthe with a much higher concentration can be found on the black market, which in theory can cause hallucinations. This seems unlikely in this case, as the absinthe the Smith couple purchased was bought officially in Europe and could not have caused such effects, according to experts. To achieve hallucinogenic effects using official absinthe would require the consumption of a huge quantity, so large that it would hardly be tolerable for the body and would most likely lead to fatal alcohol intoxication. Thus, the theory about the influence of alcohol and hallucinogens, in this case, seems unlikely and lacks convincing evidence. FBI agents conducted polygraph interviews with several key individuals in this story, including Jennifer and casino manager Lloyd Botha, both of whom passed the polygraph successfully. However, Josh Askin failed the polygraph interview, which may indicate that he had some secrets regarding George's disappearance. But it is also possible that it was the result of special interrogation tactics used to get more information from him. There was also a videotape of 3 guys, including Russians, joking about what had happened. This tape proved to be important evidence, and the FBI agents took it into consideration. One of the unidentified guys on the tape uttered the phrase, "We gave him a lesson in paragliding without a parachute," which may hint at some kind of incident or joke involving George. The George Smith investigation was also influenced by the testimony of Greg Rosenberg, who was among the young men who were in the company of those entertaining that night. He claimed that they ordered food to their cabin that day, which serves as a key alibi for the Russian boys. However, there are contradictions to this claim, as records in the ship's service logs do not support such orders, and the delivery service had been blocked for their cabin the day before. The staff was even instructed not to provide any service to them that night. Greg cannot say for sure which of the cabin's passengers placed the orders. In December 2019, Greg Rosenberg was murdered, and his death also remains unsolved. Police are looking into a possible link between his murder and the death of George Smith. The mysterious appearance of George Smith became a real mystery that cast a shadow on his family, and the situation became more and more complicated. The behavior of the relatives after this tragedy attracted the attention of both the public and law enforcement agencies. The Smith family continued to press the authorities, demanding that the truth and justice be revealed. The case of George's disappearance was transferred from the FBI's Connecticut Regional Office to the FBI's New York office. Their persistence, and more importantly, their ability to get the public's attention through the media, yielded little results in trying to solve this dark secret. The family offered a $100,000 reward for information that could help find and punish those responsible. They also called for a boycott of the shipowner's company, which they believed was trying to cover up the incident to keep profits. The relationship between George's parents and his young wife, Jennifer, became strained after the incident. Jennifer's behavior was scrutinized publicly. She appeared overly composed, cautious in her responses, and her reluctance to provide sufficient information raised suspicion. Jennifer claimed she was following the instructions of FBI agents and acting as directed. The Smith family, in their search for justice and truth, eventually lost faith in Jennifer when she accepted an offer from the judgment to settle the lawsuit independently for $1 million. The family perceived this move as a betrayal and an attempt to escape further allegations against the cruise organizers. The Smith family was disappointed by the lack of transparency in the Turkish authorities' investigation and felt that Jennifer was too quick to accept the offer. They were convinced that Jennifer was hiding something and was not showing the proper interest in finding out what had happened. Jennifer herself claimed that she remembered almost nothing from that night after 2:30 a.m. and was not even aware that the liner staff had found her in the corridor and returned her to her cabin. The Turkish investigation has not satisfied the Smith family and their belief in justice. Skeptical of the official findings, they decided to take justice into their own hands and enlisted the help of an independent forensic scientist, Henry. Lee Henry conducted a series of studies in the cabin and on the balcony, but the work was not included in the official investigation. These investigations could have revealed key information about what had happened and could have confirmed one of the two main versions of events: murder or accident. According to Henry Lee, the height of the balcony makes a fall from it unproven. It could have been the result of a third party pushing George or him being in some insane state. He could have climbed up on the chair by himself and fallen. Nevertheless, the latter version raised many questions and doubts. The expert intended to conduct an experiment to simulate a fall from the balcony, but the company owner of the liner refused this request. George's relatives claimed that this decision was made to hinder their attempts to establish the truth. Henry Lee also conducted investigations in the cabin, on the balcony, and on the boat, but the results of these investigations remained unavailable to the public. At the same time, the FBI stepped in and began conducting their own investigation, but many of their findings and discoveries also remained secret. The FBI's focus was on the 4 young men who spent the night with George, Josh Asen, and the 3 Russians, Greg Zak, Rosenberg, and Rusov Kaufman. Their testimony was largely inconsistent with that of the other witnesses, making the situation strange and confusing. The story of George Smith's disappearance continues to be a deep mystery shrouded in unknown circumstances, with a lengthy investigation and many theories. The Smith family and his loved ones continue to strive to find out the truth. They initially suspected Jennifer, but were then able to be convinced of her innocence and increased the payout amount of the lawsuit against the company. Despite the FBI's efforts and long investigations, they never found out what really happened or where George's body was located. Eventually, the case was closed and the incident was ruled an accident. The FBI determined that there was not enough evidence to continue the investigation. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Katie Sepich. On the morning of August 31, 2003, the lifeless body of 22-year-old Katie Sepich was discovered near a remote landfill in the desert of Las Cruces, New Mexico. She had last been seen by friends as she left a local house party, following a night of bar hopping. It would take almost 4 years to identify her killer. Katie, a 22-year-old woman, was described by her mom as outspoken, vivacious, and intelligent. She grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, as the oldest of 3 siblings. After graduating with a business degree from New Mexico State University, she was planning to start graduate school in the fall to pursue her MBA. At the time, Katie worked as a waitress at a local Mexican restaurant. Katie was an extremely outgoing individual who formed a close bond with a guy named Joe Bischoff while attending university. Initially, their connection was platonic, but it soon blossomed into romance. Katie confided in her mother, Jeanne, about her deep-seated happiness with Joe and her desire to forge a long-term partnership with him. A short while later, Joe presented her with a diamond engagement ring. After graduating from university in the summer of 2003, Katie and Joe's relationship faced challenges. While Katie opted to pursue further studies at the university, Joe moved back to his parents' place in Gallup, New Mexico, a small city approximately 350 miles away from Las Cruces. Katie was devastated when Joe had to depart. Although their long-distance relationship was extremely challenging, they still found ways to reunite occasionally. During the Labor Day weekend of 2003, Joe visited Las Cruces, and Katie was ecstatic. Sadly, their brief time together took a tragic turn. On Saturday, August 30th, 2003, Katie spent the evening with Joe and their friends, bar hopping before heading to a local house party. However, after the party, Katie vanished. The following day, Katie's mom, Jan, received a life-changing phone call. As a mother, Jane cherished Katie, her remarkable, outgoing, vibrant, and intelligent daughter, who always lit up the room with her infectious laughter. Katie's roommate was on the other end of the line, desperately seeking Jane's help in locating Katie, having already contacted all her friends and local hospitals, but to no avail, with no sign of Katie anywhere. Veronica, who shared a room with Katie, informed Jana that Katie had departed from the party by herself that evening. Although Veronica and Joe had assumed Katie had gone home, they fell asleep at the party venue, only to discover the next morning that she was missing. Katie's family subsequently contacted the police to report her disappearance. Around the same time, a partially clothed female body was found near a desert landfill. Although there was no identification nearby, police officers who responded to the scene determined that the body had been there for less than 24 hours. It was clear to them that the woman's death was not accidental. The victim was estimated to be between 20 and 25 years old, and her partial nudity, from the waist down, suggested that the motive behind the crime was likely sexual. She had defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she fought back against her attacker and scratched them in the process. The police found skin cells from the assailant under her fingernails, which provided a crucial DNA sample. There were also signs of strangulation on her neck, indicating this was likely the cause of her death. Despite this, there was no evidence of a struggle at the scene where the body was found, leading investigators to believe she died elsewhere. It appeared the killer moved her body to the remote desert landfill in an attempt to delay its discovery. On the victim's body, another shocking discovery was made. Burn marks were found on her arms and back. These marks suggested that the perpetrator attempted to either dispose of the body or destroy evidence, and in doing so, they intentionally set the victim on fire. The police quickly linked Katie's disappearance to the discovery of a young woman's body. Katie's father then went to the mortuary to identify the body. According to Katie's mother, Jeanne, after a few hours of agonizing uncertainty, their worst fears were confirmed. The body was indeed Katie's. The pain was overwhelming, and they were consumed by grief. They felt trapped in a desperate situation with no escape, as if all happiness and hope had been lost, leaving no future ahead. Katie's father was required to identify the body of his beloved daughter. He later recounted to the investigators that when they pulled back the sheet, revealing her bruised and contorted face, he was overcome with emotion, dropped to his knees, and prayed to God to take his own life, overwhelmed by grief. The residents of Las Cruces, once a peaceful place, were left horrified by the traumatic event that befell Katie. With a sense of urgency, the police launched an extensive investigation to apprehend the perpetrator as quickly as possible, largely driven by the fear that this individual might strike again. To better understand Katie's case, the police started by reconstructing the final hours of her life. They sought to establish her whereabouts, her companions, and her activities during that time, as well as whether she had any altercations or enemies. Since the party venue was approximately a mile from Katie's home, the police had to ascertain whether she had managed to return home safely. The investigators' first interviews were with Veronica, Katie's roommate, and Joe, her boyfriend. It struck them as odd that these two had stayed at the party while Katie had departed alone in the middle of the night. Joe displayed a lack of willingness to cooperate with the police, stating that Katie had left the party of her own accord and had intentionally left behind her purse, phone, and keys. The detectives thoroughly examined Katie's route, conducting a door-to-door inquiry and speaking with local residents. But regrettably, no one witnessed or overheard anything unusual. A promising lead indicated that Katie had arrived at her house but failed to enter, as she had departed without her keys. The investigators conducted a thorough search of the house and its surroundings, discovering Katie's shoes outside her bedroom window. It seemed that she had attempted to re-enter the house through the window, but was suddenly attacked. The footprints in the gravel beside the house supported this theory. Katie had put up a fierce fight for her life, but unfortunately, her attacker proved to be stronger. The investigators proposed that after killing Katie, the perpetrator transported her body to the desert landfill and attempted to burn it. They started questioning whether the perpetrator was a stranger or someone Katie knew and trusted. Since around 40 people had attended the party, the investigators looked into the possibility that someone might have trailed Katie when she went home and attacked her, possibly even her boyfriend Joe. When the police questioned Joe again, they told him they were aware that he and Katie had a dispute because she caught him kissing another girl. Joe confirmed this was true and stated that after Katie left, he followed her in his car, but he didn't enter her home because he saw her bedroom light was off and thought she was asleep. So he went back to the party. The investigators stumbled upon another peculiar aspect of Joe's behavior. After leaving the party, he frequently dialed Katie's cell phone, which was still in her purse, and persisted in doing so until morning. The question was whether Joe was attempting to establish an alibi for himself or feign concern for Katie's well-being. The investigators wanted Joe to explain his suspicious behavior, but he refused to cooperate with them any further. Despite loving Joe deeply, Katie's family was shocked when he failed to attend her funeral, which only fueled their suspicions. In the end, the investigators only needed one thing to clear Joe's name: a DNA sample. Experts discovered DNA samples at 3 different locations on Katie's body, with most of it located under her fingernails. The DNA was identified as human skin cells. Notably, all the DNA samples found on Katie's body came from the same individual. The police were keen to compare Joe's DNA with the DNA recovered from Katie's body, but they faced obstacles in doing so. At the time, Joe was out of town, and his parents had hired a lawyer who informed the investigators that Joe had declined to provide a DNA sample for testing. It was clear to everyone that Joe was hiding something and was likely involved in Katie's death, judging by his behavior. The police were convinced of his guilt, but they needed to find a legal way to obtain his DNA to confirm their suspicions, which took some time. At the same time, investigators were examining alternative explanations. They were researching similar crimes to determine if Katie was the sole victim of whoever ended her life. The DNA samples discovered on her body were compared to a national database, but no matches were found. The investigators went back to the starting point of their inquiry, the party where everything began. They managed to track down all the male guests who had attended the party and requested that each of them provide a DNA sample. Every single one of them complied, since they claimed to have nothing to conceal. Nevertheless, the results of the DNA analysis did not yield any matches with the DNA traces found on Katie's body. This lack of a match led the investigators to refocus their attention on Joe, the solitary individual who had declined to provide his DNA sample. The investigators discovered an alternative approach. Prior to attending the party, Katie and Joe had spent time in her bedroom, where they had been physically intimate. The police subsequently visited the house and collected the sheet from Katie's bed, suspecting they might find Joe's DNA on it. Their hunch proved correct. The laboratory analysis did reveal a sample of male DNA, but it did not correspond to the DNA found on Katie's body. This meant that Joe was not the perpetrator who attacked her. If Joe wasn't involved in what happened to his girlfriend, why did he initially refuse to cooperate with the police? Once the police sent the test results to his lawyer, Joe discovered he had been cleared as a suspect. Following this, Joe changed his mind and decided to talk to the police again, even providing a DNA sample. The new test results confirmed the initial finding. Joe was innocent of the crime. Joe refused to cooperate with the police because he had previously had intimate contact with Katie before the party, and he feared they would discover his DNA on her body. Despite their best efforts, the police and Katie's family couldn't understand Joe's behavior on the night of her death. After Joe was cleared as a suspect, the police had to explore alternative theories. Several partygoers informed the investigators that Katie was wearing rings on her fingers that night, including one given to her by Joe. However, when Katie's body was found, her fingers were bare. The police suspected that the killer had removed the rings. They searched all local pawn shops, but failed to find Katie's stolen jewelry. Near where Katie's body was discovered, another potential lead emerged in the form of tire tracks. Forensic experts successfully identified the brand and model of the tires in question. Upon contacting the manufacturer, the police learned that these specific tires are typically fitted to pickup trucks. Regrettably, this new information failed to bring the authorities any closer to catching the perpetrator, and the case ultimately stalled. About a year after Katie's incident, a similar crime occurred in Wisconsin. In Green Bay, a girl was attacked and suffered the same brutal fate as Katie. She was also set on fire, but miraculously, she managed to survive. The victim credited her survival to feigning death, which led the attackers to leave her. Once they were gone, she put out the flames and sought help at a nearby residence. She claimed to have been attacked by two Hispanic males, but the evidence in Katie's case suggested only one perpetrator was involved. To determine if there was a link between the two crimes, DNA analysis was necessary. The victim from Wisconsin provided a detailed description of her attackers to the police. When the Green Bay police released the composite sketches, a local farmer recognized the men as his employees, Gregorio Morales and Juan, since one of them had relatives in Las Cruces and often visited them. As a result, both men were arrested, and the police investigating Katie's case believed they had finally identified the culprit. However, the results of the DNA examination proved otherwise. The samples did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. These two men were later convicted of assaulting a girl in Green Bay, but they were not connected to the Katie case. Morales was sentenced to 50 years in prison and Gregorio to 50 years. Thus, the investigators reached another dead end. The only evidence the police had were tire tracks from the crime scene and DNA samples of the perpetrator. Katie's family hoped that DNA would allow the police to identify the person who took their daughter's life, but there were problems with that. It was not legal to take a DNA sample from anyone arrested by the police. Jeanne, Katie's mom, expressed her surprise and frustration about this. They had lost their daughter to a monster, and they needed justice, to know who had done this and why. And most of all, they needed to know that he would be stopped from doing this again. The detective leading Katie's case informed Jeanne that the only evidence they possessed was DNA. During her fierce struggle to survive, Katie had managed to collect her killer's blood and skin underneath her fingernails. The police had successfully extracted a DNA profile from this evidence and uploaded it into CODIS, a national forensic database. Detective Jones clarified that every week, this DNA evidence would be automatically cross-checked against the offender database to search for a potential match. This news brought renewed hope to Katie's family, as they were confident that they would eventually identify their daughter's killer once a matching profile was found. Detective Gian casually mentioned that the perpetrator was such a menace he'd likely be arrested again soon, at which point his DNA would be collected and entered into the system, leading to his identification and eventual conviction. However, Detective Jones contradicted him, explaining that this process isn't possible in New Mexico or most other states, as it's against the law to collect DNA samples from someone simply because they've been arrested. 3.5 years after Katie's death, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case on December 18, 2006. A DNA sample was discovered that matched the DNA evidence found on Katie's body. The attacker was identified as 26-year-old Gabriel Avila, a married father of one who had no prior connection to Katie. Notably, Avila had a lengthy criminal history and had been released from prison just shortly before Katie's murder on November 13, 2003. Less than 3 months after killing Katie, Avila was caught and arrested for breaking into an apartment shared by 2 young women carrying a knife. Fortunately, the college roommates managed to avoid an attack by locking themselves in the bathroom and quickly calling the police. In March 2004, Avila was found guilty of aggravated burglary with the intention of committing aggravated assault. However, after being released on bail, Avila fled instead of facing justice. Avila could have been caught and arrested just 3 months after Katie's attack, but due to flaws in the system, it took 3.5 years to establish a connection between him and Katie's death. Avila evaded police for almost a year before being caught in November 2004, thanks to a tip. He received a 9-year prison sentence, and a DNA sample was taken when he entered prison, but it sat untested for another 2 years. When the results finally came back, showing a partial match to DNA from Katie's crime scene, investigators sprang into action, tracking down the truck Avila used to dispose of her body, where they found a ring that belonged to Katie. This case highlights the need for system change. The police wasted resources and time searching for the perpetrator for 3 years, which could have been avoided if they had taken a DNA sample from Avila during his initial arrest. Moreover, it is astonishing that his DNA sample was only tested 2 years later, in 2006. Detectives investigating Katie's case visited Avila in prison after finding her ring in his pickup truck. Avila confessed to the crime, explaining that he had been in the area that night to buy illegal substances while his wife was away. He claimed that he offered Katie a ride when he saw her, but she declined. Later, he saw her again outside her house and stopped to offer help when she said she couldn't get in because she didn't have her purse. Katie tried to climb into her bedroom window, but Avila attacked and undressed her. Unsure what to do next, Avila strangled Katie, fearing she would identify him later. He then put her body in his pickup truck and drove to a desert landfill, where he dumped her body and attempted to set it on fire to destroy evidence, but his plan failed. Avila's DNA sample was recollected, and it matched DNA evidence found on Katie's body from 2003. Her parents were hopeful this new finding would lead to a swift investigation. However, they were shocked to discover that, in New Mexico and nearly every other state, it was illegal to collect DNA samples from individuals upon arrest. Instead, DNA was only entered into the system after someone had been convicted and sentenced to prison. This discovery prompted Katie's parents to launch a nationwide campaign, seeking to pass a law in all 50 states requiring individuals arrested for violent crimes to provide a DNA sample. The DNA would then be added to the CODIS national database, facilitating investigations and potentially solving crimes. In 2006, Katie's Law was passed by the New Mexico state legislature with a near-unanimous vote of only 5 dissenting voices, and was subsequently signed into law in March 2006. Following the relentless advocacy of Katie's parents, the legislation was eventually adopted at the federal level in 2010. To date, over 31 states have enacted laws similar to New Mexico's Katie's Law. Katie's father, David, had long feared that another person would suffer the same fate as his daughter at the hands of her killer. But with the law now in place, he can finally find some comfort and relief. Opponents of this policy argue it invades privacy and violates civil rights, while others note that DNA, unlike fingerprints, contains sensitive genetic information. In the case of United States versus Kincaid, a federal district court ruled that collecting DNA samples before conviction and including them in the National DNA Database does not violate constitutional rights. In 2017, Gabriel Avila's trial got underway. During the proceedings, Avila offered a heartfelt apology to Katie's family. His lawyer pleaded with the judge to show mercy, citing Avila's remorsefulness as a mitigating factor. District Attorney Susana Martinez countered that Avila had delayed his confession for over 3 years, only coming forward when confronted with irrefutable DNA evidence by detectives. At the sentencing hearing, Katie's father, David, addressed the judge, imploring him not to be lenient with the punishment. He argued that his family would never have the opportunity to see Katie again, and it was only fair that the person responsible for her death should not be allowed to experience freedom again in their own lifetime. In May 2007, Gabriel Avila was found guilty and received a 69-year prison sentence. He will be eligible for parole in 2043 after serving 30 years of his sentence. Jenna believes that true closure is unattainable, but she is now ready to move forward. She, her husband, and their 2 other children have been healing and progressing with their lives, and they cherish their remaining kids deeply. Additionally, Jenny has pledged that she and her husband will persist in their efforts to have Katie's Law enacted in all 50 states as a testament to their deceased daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Autumn Taggart. Autumn Taggart, a single mother, lived in Windsor, a city near the Michigan-Ontario border, with her 9-year-old son Gavin in 2018. Despite her breakup with Gavin's father, Chris Sherwin, they remained on good terms to minimize the impact on their child. On Saturday, June 9, 2018, Autumn and Gavin spent the afternoon with Chris, and after grocery shopping together, he dropped them off at their 3rd-floor apartment. After Chris left, Gavin played video games with his mother before bedtime, unaware of the horrifying night that was about to unfold. Gavin woke up to a noise while it was still dark outside. Startled, he opened his eyes to see a strange man standing close to his bed. The man instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep before leaving the room. Gavin knew his mother's room was located behind the wall to the right, as shown in the photo. About a minute later, he heard his mother scream. The boy had never felt such intense fear before. The screaming eventually stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the space. After a few minutes, Gavin fell asleep, overcome with exhaustion. Gavin woke up to find it was already morning. He got out of bed and went straight to his mother's room. He was met with a scene of utter destruction. Everything was smashed and broken. His mother, Autumn, was lying on the bed, but she wasn't asleep. At first, 9-year-old Gavin thought she was just resting, but the blood on her nose told a different story. The reality hit him like a ton of bricks. His mother was dead. Gavin was in denial, refusing to accept the truth. To distract himself from the grim reality, he spent the morning playing video games on his console and watching YouTube videos, trying to avoid the unpleasant fact that his deceased mother was lying in the next room. In the afternoon, Gavin couldn't take the pressure anymore and broke down in tears. He decided to confide in someone, so he went to his mother's room, took her phone, and messaged his father on Messenger. He typed out a desperate message. Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris and his girlfriend quickly got in their car and drove to Gavin and Autumn's home. When they arrived, Chris parked the car and got out, spotting his son standing behind a sliding glass door on the third floor. However, Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter the building, so Gavin came downstairs to let him in. Chris asked his son to wait with his girlfriend while he went to investigate why Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris entered the apartment, proceeded to the bedroom, and was shocked to see Autumn's pale appearance. Her face and body were bruised, and her nose was bloody. He immediately dialed 911. The police and an ambulance arrived at the address he provided, where the paramedics examined Autumn's body and surveyed the signs of struggle in the bedroom. Given the extent of her injuries and the evidence of a fierce fight, they sadly had no option but to pronounce her dead, concluding that it was no accident. Investigators searched the apartment for clues, while a specialist in child interrogation spoke with Gavin, who revealed that an overnight guest had instructed him to go to bed. Gavin recounted hearing his mother's screams, but they abruptly ceased. He provided a description of the man he saw in his room that night, saying he appeared to be a white male of average height with messy hair, resembling someone who had just rolled out of bed. According to Gavin, the man was skinny, but not too skinny. The autopsy concluded that Autumn's death was the result of strangulation. Furthermore, it was discovered that she had been physically assaulted prior to her death, with injuries found in her genital area. Additionally, male DNA samples were recovered from her body. The investigation aimed to address several key questions, including how the perpetrator gained access to the apartment, what motivated the crime, and most crucially, the identity of the individual who had entry to the building, as an electronic key was required for entry. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that the killer was one of the building's residents, since Gavin was familiar with all his neighbors and the man he spotted on the night of the murder was not among them. To commit the crime, the perpetrator would have needed not only an electronic key to access the building, but also a way to enter Autumn's apartment, which presented a problem. There were no signs of forced entry on the door to her apartment, suggesting that either she had let the perpetrator in voluntarily or had failed to lock the door. Eventually, the police abandoned their initial assumptions when they discovered evidence that the perpetrator had accessed the third floor. It emerged that the individual had first climbed up to the second-floor balcony and then made their way to the third floor, where they found the door was already open, allowing them to enter the apartment unimpeded. In addition to the DNA sample, the police also found fingerprints at the scene, which they were working to match to their owner. It wasn't until 12 days after the body was discovered that the police finally released the victim's identity, in the hope that this would lead to new tips from the public. The authorities are seeking anyone with information that could aid the investigation to come forward and contact the detectives. A witness reported seeing a new black SUV, possibly a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot adjacent to the building on the night of the crime. The vehicle was seen in the lot until around 6 a.m. Detectives believe the SUV's owner may have been involved in Autumn's death and hypothesized that the individual used the roof of their car as a stepping stone to climb higher. Specifically, they think the perpetrator exploited the building's decorative protrusions, which resemble steps, to ascend from the second floor to the third. The nighttime crime scene presented an advantage to investigators as most people are asleep then, resulting in fewer mobile phones being active. By analyzing phone activity in Autumn's area, they were able to narrow down the list of active numbers near the crime scene. During the investigation, detectives found that one of the phone numbers belonged to a neighbor of Autumn's, who lived in the same building. Although the neighbor claimed to know nothing about the incident during her police interview, her alibi didn't quite add up. Phone records showed that she had made calls from her apartment and various locations around the city, and her phone was switched off around the time Autumn's life was taken. While it was difficult to pinpoint her exact location due to the margin of error in phone tracking, it was clear that she was being evasive and hiding something from the detectives. So they went to speak with Michelle again. She reiterated that she didn't know anything and hadn't heard anything, but the police subtly warned her that if it was later discovered she had withheld vital information from the investigation, she could be considered an accomplice to the crime. As a result, she began to talk. Michelle said that around 2 a.m. that night, a man known to them as Jay got in touch with her and her boyfriend. Jay was looking to buy illegal drugs and also wanted to hire an escort. The three of them drove to an ATM where Jay withdrew some cash. After that, Michelle and her boyfriend handed over a certain amount of the drug to Jay. Michelle admitted that she and her boyfriend were drug dealers. Later, Jay asked them to sell him more drugs. According to Michelle, she then told Jay to drive to the parking lot near her building. Michelle confessed that she and her boyfriend had planned to rob Jay. Upon arrival at the building, the three individuals ingested illicit drugs. Following this, Michelle and her boyfriend resolved to abscond with the remaining drugs. Prior to their escape, Michelle concealed a bag of the drugs within her genital area. According to Michelle, she and her boyfriend escaped, stealing not just the substance, but also a significant amount of Jay's money. They fled to the building's entrance, then went up to the apartment, where they barricaded themselves inside, sitting silently in the dark. Jay was unable to enter the building since he lacked an electronic key, and he couldn't yell or honk his horn, fearing that someone might alert the police. According to Michelle, when they looked out the window, they noticed shoe marks on the roof of Jay's car. Additionally, a man was seen driving away at approximately 6 a.m. Investigators theorized that Jay must have climbed into the building, attempting to track down those responsible for stealing the substance and money from him. However, as he was unaware of Michelle's residence, it's likely that he inadvertently entered Autumn's apartment by mistake. The police obtained the suspect's phone number and photo from a camera at the bank entrance, where he withdrew cash to buy the substance, and from an ATM camera. Investigators learned that the man's real name was Jitesh Bogle, a 27-year-old Canadian citizen who lived and worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan. He was also the owner of a black Honda Pilot SUV and frequently crossed the river by bridge or tunnel to visit Canada, specifically Windsor, almost daily. Authorities tracked the suspect's movements, discovering he had left Canada on June 10th, the morning Autumn died, and had not returned to the country since. Following the police release of information about the black SUV seen at the victim's house, Jitesh sold his car. Canadian police collaborated with their American counterparts, learning Jitesh planned to relocate from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents resided in Kent. The combination of his decision to move, disposing of the car, and ceasing visits to Canada raised strong suspicions, but the police required concrete evidence to arrest and extradite him to Canada. The Windsor police requested assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency in their investigation and asked them to closely monitor the suspect's activities. DNA evidence found on Autumn's body suggested it belonged to Jitesh, but to confirm this, they needed to obtain a DNA sample from him for comparison. U.S. agents tracked the suspect's every move, aware that he was planning to relocate to Washington State and fearing he might flee to another country. In an effort to alter his appearance, Jitesh shaved his beard and started wearing blue contact lenses. Fortunately for the investigators, Jitesh was reckless. One day, he visited a bar in Warren, where he spent several hours drinking. When he downed his last glass and exited the bar, the agent swiftly seized the glass, thereby obtaining a DNA sample from it. Although it took some time to compare this new sample with the one found on Autumn's body, the outcome was not unexpected. The male DNA discovered on the victim's body was identified as a match to Jitesh Bogle's DNA. On August 17, 2018, nearly 2.5 months following Autumn Taggart's tragic demise, Jitesh was taken into custody at his parents' residence in Kent, Washington, a development that caught him off guard, as he appeared to believe the authorities would be unable to locate him. The U.S. authorities promptly initiated the extradition process to have him returned to his native country. In the supporting extradition documents, the prosecutor underscored Jitesh's perceived threats to public safety, his high risk of fleeing, and his unpredictable nature. Soon after, Canadian authorities charged him with the murder of Autumn Taggart. Due to pandemic-related restrictions, the trial was delayed for an extended period. However, it finally began in November 2021. To maintain social distancing, the proceedings took place in 3 separate courtrooms: the main courtroom, where the judge, prosecutor, jury, and the defendant with his defense team were seated, and 2 additional courtrooms equipped with large screens broadcasting the trial to Autumn's family members and other observers. Jitesh Bogle denied committing first-degree deprivation of life, claiming he unintentionally killed Autumn. He explained that earlier, some thieves stole money and drugs from his car, leaving him upset. After consuming a large amount of alcohol and substances, he got out of the vehicle to search for the thieves. Due to his intoxication, he didn't recall many events from that night. However, he remembered climbing onto the balcony and entering the apartment where Autumn was sleeping, mistakenly thinking she was Michelle, the woman who had robbed him. When Autumn awoke and started screaming, he ordered her to be quiet, but she disobeyed. In response, he covered her mouth, which led to her suffocation. Only after the screaming stopped did Jitesh realize he had accidentally taken Autumn's life, and he attempted to perform CPR on her, but it was too late. Jitesh had no memory of how Autumn's genital injuries occurred or how he left her apartment. His lawyers requested that the first-degree life imprisonment charges be dropped, arguing that the crime was not premeditated. They believed Jitesh was unaware of his actions due to the large quantity of substances he had consumed. The fact that he placed his hand over Autumn's mouth suggests he wanted her to be quiet, not dead. According to defense lawyer Peter Thorning, Jitesh lacked the capacity to form intent or understand the consequences of his actions. Thorning claimed that intoxication was the sole explanation for Jitesh's behavior, and that sometimes tragic events occur without intending the outcome. He stated that Autumn's death was not intentional, and that Jitesh was either too intoxicated to realize his actions could cause death or did not appreciate the consequences. Jitesh's lawyers argued that there was no evidence to suggest the defendant had sexual intercourse with the victim. Although Jitesh's DNA was found on Autumn's body, it was not seminal fluid, according to the lawyers. They suggested that the DNA could have been transferred through cross-contamination, where DNA is accidentally transferred from one surface to another, possibly through the forensic expert's gloves. The defense team attempted to convince the jury that John Lort, a forensic expert involved in the investigation, had botched his job and inadvertently transferred Jitesh's DNA to Autumn Taggart's body. As part of his role, Lort was responsible for photographing the crime scene and collecting evidence that came into direct contact with the victim. Jitesh's defense lawyer, Peter Thorning, questioned Lort about the possibility of DNA or fluid transfer from the body to the bedsheet or vice versa during the manipulation of the body, which is a known phenomenon referred to as cross-contamination. Lort stated during cross-examination that he changed gloves between handling each piece of evidence and using his camera to take photographs, thus preventing cross-contamination. In his examination of evidence in Taggart's room, Lort searched for bodily fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen, as he explained that in cases involving a deceased female victim, the likelihood of sexual assault is higher compared to cases involving a male victim. Lort testified to the court that he did not find any fluid evidence consistent with sexual assault. He acknowledged that his examination of the body was limited, as he was not a trained medical professional, such as a coroner. Lort testified that there were no obvious signs of a struggle at Autumn's apartment, such as broken furniture or glass, forced entry, tampered locks, or blood spatter. In contrast, the prosecutor believed that the defendant's actions constituted a search for hidden substances, similar to how Michelle had hidden them in her genital area. The prosecutor argued that the defendant committed sexual assault by searching Autumn's body in the same way, regardless of whether he used his hand. When questioned by the prosecutor about why he didn't call 911 when Autumn stopped breathing, Jitesh disagreed, saying he didn't think it was necessary. Jitesh responded that he feared the police would arrest him because he knew nobody would take his word for it. He could hardly believe his own story, as he recounted in his testimony. Jitesh acknowledged that his memory of the events in Autumn's room was hazy. However, he did recall performing CPR on Autumn after she had stopped screaming. Previously, he had testified that he remembered counting 5 or 6 ribs down before starting CPR, and that he had done 15 compressions accompanied by 3 breaths. The prosecutor also challenged the defendant's claim that the strangulation of the victim was accidental. He pointed out that if the defendant simply wanted to silence Autumn, he could have covered her mouth with his hand. Instead, he also pinched her nose shut, which deliberately prevented her from breathing. Moreover, he sustained this grip for a period of time, indicating that he was fully aware of his actions. Chris Sherwin, Autumn Taggart's former partner and the father of their son, was the last person to hear from her via text message around 12:30 a.m. on June 10th. After sending a follow-up text and receiving no response, he grew concerned. It wasn't until later that day that he received a text from Autumn's phone, only to discover it was their son responding. The court displayed a copy of these text messages for the jury to review on December 1st, 2021. Following deliberation, the 12-person jury found Jitesh Bogle guilty of depriving Autumn of her life. Despite allegations, they found no convincing evidence that Jitesh had engaged in sexual intercourse with Autumn. Autumn's father, John Taggar, expressed relief and gratitude for the verdict, stating, "Can't say we weren't nervous, but it's definitely the right verdict. Autumn deserved this. Her son deserved this. Justice. That's what we wanted. That's what we got." The family members were visibly relieved, hugging each other in celebration. On January 5th, 2022, the court sentenced Jitesh Bogle to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before he is eligible for parole. Jitesh appeared in court via video from jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit and a black mask. During the victim impact statements, he sat quietly against the wall, distant from the camera. When given the opportunity to speak, he expressed remorse, saying, "It's hard to express the sorrow and remorse I feel. I am happy for the family that they have a sense of justice, and they can move on. Part of my soul died that day as well." Autumn's father, John Taggar, reiterated his desire for Canadian laws to change, stating, "We'd still like to see the laws in Canada change for life sentences to actual life, not 25 years and then parole. We'd like life to mean life for all victims." Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ellen Greenberg. Ellen Ray Greenberg was born in New York in June 1993 to Santa and George Greenberg. As their only child, she grew up in a loving and nurturing environment. During her high school years, Ellen was a dedicated team player and demonstrated great athletic potential. She was characterized as energetic, restless, and outgoing, yet she also excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen attended Pennsylvania State University, where she earned a degree in public relations. However, she soon realized this wasn't the career path she wanted to pursue. In parallel with her job, she enrolled in a pedagogical institute's correspondence department, and a few years later, successfully defended her diploma. Ellen then relocated to Philadelphia, where she landed a job as a junior high school teacher. Ellen's life was thriving, according to her relatives. She was bursting with enthusiasm, making ambitious plans for the future, and absolutely loved her work with students. It was during this period that she met Samuel, also known as Sam Greenberg, a young man from a wealthy and prominent family in the city. Sam's parents ran a large business, and his uncle was renowned as one of the top lawyers in the state. The two met in 2009 at a party through mutual friends and instantly clicked. Their friendly banter soon turned into a whirlwind romance, and they decided to move in together shortly after. As the clock struck 2011, on New Year's Eve, Sam proposed to Ellen, and the couple began making preparations for their spring wedding that same year. The news was met with joy from both families, and it seemed that nothing could come between the happy couple. Ellen threw herself into the delightful tasks associated with wedding planning, including drawing up guest lists, sending out invitations, choosing a venue and decorations, trying on wedding dresses, and organizing their honeymoon. Notably, Ellen took the reins on these preparations, with the groom seemingly uninvolved, although their loved ones didn't think much of it at the time. On January 26, 2011, a severe snowstorm hit the city. Ellen went to school as usual, but classes were canceled around noon due to strong winds and a blizzard, and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she shared with her fiancé, Sam. Later that day, the couple allegedly had a disagreement, which Sam initially confirmed but later denied. At around 5 p.m., Sam went to the gym in their apartment complex. When he returned, he found the apartment door locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly, then called out to Ellen by name, drawing the attention of their neighbors. He also tried calling her phone and sending messages, but there was no response to his knocking, calling, and yelling. However, it was clear that Ellen's phone was still inside the apartment. Sam went to the first floor of the building to ask the security guard for help. He explained the situation and asked if it was possible to open the front door, but the guard said he didn't have the authority to do so and couldn't leave his post. Sam returned to his floor, determined to take action. He used his shoulder to force open the door, managing to break the latch on the first try. As he entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific sight. Ellen was sitting on the floor, her back against the cabinet door, her body brutally slashed with a knife and her clothes covered in blood. Sam immediately called emergency services, describing the scene. When asked to check Ellen's pulse, Sam hesitated, repeatedly asking if it was really necessary. Then there was a pause before he suddenly announced that there was a knife stuck in Ellen's chest, which he claimed he hadn't noticed until that moment. He concluded that Ellen was clearly already dead. The police officers who responded to the call were taken aback, having never encountered a scene like this in their extensive careers. They found the door locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had later dislodged with his shoulder. There was no evidence of forced entry or intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment, and all valuables and cash remained untouched. The officers noted that nothing appeared to have been searched or disturbed. However, the most striking aspect emerged when the deceased girl's body was examined. There were no signs of struggle or attempts at self-defense, suggesting that the event occurred suddenly and the victim had no time to react. The body bore approximately 24 stab wounds of varying depths, with the fatal blow delivered to the heart, claiming Ellen's life. The investigation's gross negligence in examining the crime scene and the victim's body will be revisited later. This oversight allowed crucial evidence to go undetected, permitting a potential perpetrator to remain at large. What was even more bizarre was the police's behavior, who, even before the medical examination, seemed to think that Ellen's injuries were self-inflicted. The fact that Ellen had been experiencing panic attacks and was seeing a psychologist and was on prescription medication led them to believe that she had attempted to take her own life. Ever since she had started suffering from an anxiety disorder, Ellen had been prone to panic attacks. The situation was so severe that she had sought professional help from a psychologist. She tried not to burden her family with her concerns, and they, in turn, had attributed the changes in her behavior to pre-wedding stress and excitement. The psychologist who worked with Ellen had prescribed her 2 medications to help manage her anxiety, which she took regularly. As the psychologist would later report, neither of these medications, whether taken separately or together, could have had any adverse effect on Ellen's mental state, leading her to contemplate death. The specialist also noted that, despite her anxiety, Ellen had never had such dark thoughts. Ellen's friends and colleagues observed a change in her behavior after she moved in with Sam. She became anxious, restless, and hesitant to make decisions without consulting him. Whenever faced with a situation, Ellen would say she needed to discuss it with Sam and couldn't give an answer without his input. Ellen's parents also noticed these changes, but whenever their daughter tried to open up about her emotional struggles, she would insist that Sam was not the cause. Interestingly, 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and move back to her parents' house. Her mother was taken aback but reassured Ellen that she was always welcome to return home, no questions asked. However, Ellen never mentioned it again. Later, it was suggested that after the couple moved in together, Sam became violent towards his fiancée, and she lived in fear, too afraid to confide in anyone about the abuse. Although the psychologist Ellen saw did not confirm or deny this, they observed that Ellen struggled to put her feelings into words and describe what was troubling her. It seemed as though she wanted to reveal something significant, but her fear held her back. The case was plagued by inconsistencies and unanswered questions from the start. What's striking is that nobody made a serious effort to investigate these anomalies. The investigation was remarkably sloppy, with the crime scene and body examination poorly handled and expert analysis lacking. Many crucial details, facts, and evidence were disregarded and lost forever, making it impossible to reconstruct the events of the incident accurately. There were no signs of self-defense injuries on the victim's hands, suggesting that she did not try to fight back. Her body, however, showed multiple bruises. According to her fiancé, these were likely caused by her participation in team sports. Ellen's parents disputed this, stating that their daughter had not had time for sports or gym activities recently due to her busy work schedule and active wedding preparations. No suicide note was found, and Ellen's body showed signs of a brutal attack. Yet, investigators quickly suggested that she might have taken her own life. The presence of food spices and a cutting board on the kitchen table led them to theorize that Ellen had started preparing dinner, only to suddenly decide to end her life by cutting herself with a knife. However, the autopsy revealed that Ellen's body had nearly 24 stab wounds of varying depths, with 10 of them inflicted from behind. Given the severity of some of these wounds, medical experts questioned how she could have continued to move and inflict such injuries on herself, eventually stabbing herself in the heart. This raised serious doubts about the initial suicide ruling. Despite these contradictions, the investigation stuck to its original version, refusing to open a criminal case. The main reason cited was the lack of evidence of an intruder in the apartment and the absence of any signs of self-defense. Some concerns were raised about the possibility of forced entry into the apartment due to the unusual latch on the inner part of the door. This latch could be closed from the outside, but not fully. If the latch had been fully closed from the inside, it would have been impossible to break it open with a single shoulder blow without damaging the doorway. However, based on the nature of the damage, it appeared that the latch was only partially closed, which would have been possible from outside the door. Sam testified that he sought help from a security guard, who accompanied him upstairs and witnessed him kicking down a door. However, the guard disputed this, stating that he never left his post. Despite this discrepancy, the investigation did not pursue the matter, deeming it irrelevant. The investigation reviewed footage from a single surveillance camera leading to the gym, which showed Sam walking towards the gym and then returning. Although it is possible that Sam exited through another passage and returned to the gym during the intervening time, his alibi was not investigated, and potential witnesses who could confirm or deny his presence at the gym were not interviewed. Sam didn't call the police until an hour after he discovered the door was locked, and his fiancée didn't respond to his knocking and shouting. When he finally made the call, the officer who took it noticed that Sam was acting strangely, despite his frantic screams and wails. The specialist was suspicious of Sam's behavior, thinking it was an act, because although he was calm enough to answer questions, his voice wasn't shaking when asked to start administering first aid. At first, Sam questioned the need to do so, then calmed down, and finally mentioned a knife stuck in his girlfriend's chest, which he claimed not to have noticed earlier. It's worth noting that before calling the police, Sam called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police and went with Sam to the station to make a statement. The next day, Sam and his uncle went back to the sealed-off apartment to collect some personal belongings, taking all of Ellen's electronic devices, 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet. A few days after the investigation began, detectives unexpectedly decided to examine the devices in question, only to discover that the search history contained queries related to suicide. When police officers arrived at the scene, they conducted a brief investigation and hastily concluded that Ellen had committed suicide. Even when new evidence came to light, they refused to reconsider their initial ruling. The sequence of events surrounding Ellen's wounds couldn't be determined, but it was clear that the fatal blow was to the heart. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy found this unusual and decided to conduct a further investigation. He sent a sample of Ellen's spine to a specialist to determine if her spinal cord was damaged. If it was, Ellen would have been paralyzed and unable to inflict the fatal wound herself. However, the specialist suddenly changed his mind, abandoned the investigation, and claimed that the spinal cord was intact. Despite this, the report was never attached to the case files. The authorities also overlooked the fact that, despite the extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood at the scene, suggesting that someone may have cleaned it up. No one bothered to search for potential signs of blood being washed away. The luminol that could have been used to detect blood traces was ignored. Additionally, the trash cans in the apartment were not examined, which meant that any potential evidence they may have held was lost forever. The Greenberg family broke the devastating news to Ellen's parents about their daughter's death, as they were the first to arrive at the scene. Although Ellen's family lived several hundred miles away, they rushed to the location as soon as possible. Santa and George were in shock, refusing to accept that their daughter would take her own life. However, they were left with unanswered questions about the events of that night, and received only a vague conclusion with no criminal investigation. Frustrated, the Greenbergs' family decided to launch their own inquiry with the help of independent experts. A private detective, intrigued by the case, offered his services for free. After reviewing the evidence, the detective concluded that Ellen's body had been moved after her death, evident from a dried blood trickle from her nose to her ear and smeared stains on the floor resembling drag marks. Furthermore, a guard recalled that Sam, who had sought help, was wearing boots, not a tracksuit as he had claimed. Despite the presentation of new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were once again refused a criminal case or further investigation. In addition, they were refused access to case files, which included a recording of Sam's phone call to the police and surveillance footage. Years later, a young officer joined the county's homicide unit as an assistant prosecutor. Having heard about the unsolved and unusual case while studying at the university, he decided to conduct a further investigation. During his inquiry, he discovered that the injury to the back of Ellen's head suggested she may have been attacked from behind, and that there was no evidence of a spinal cord injury, contradicting the official conclusion. After re-examining the preserved spine fragment, an independent specialist concluded that the spinal cord had suffered damage in multiple areas, making it impossible for Ellen to have caused further harm to herself. Despite this, the police declined to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner officially ruled that all 20 wounds were self-inflicted. But Ellen's grieving parents filed a new lawsuit in 2019, alleging that the coroner and experts had not done their jobs properly. Although the lawsuit was heard and settled, the trials did not begin due to the pandemic. Ellen's family, friends, and colleagues are convinced that she could not have taken her own life, citing her aversion to the sight of blood and low pain threshold. The parents created a social media page to share official documents, new information, and alternative theories. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed once again, but the Greenbergs managed to transfer it to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over and reopened the investigation, 11 years after the tragic events. However, to this day, the investigation remains unfinished. After the tragedy, Samuel made an effort to stay in contact with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law for the first year. However, he did not participate in the investigations they initiated. He refused to cooperate with the police and showed no interest in the case. He openly accepted the official account that his fiancée had inflicted the fatal injuries on herself. Samuel soon found comfort with another woman and married her just a year later. He and his new wife moved to a different state and ended all ties with the Greenberg family. Today, Samuel and his wife are raising 2 children together, and he tries to forget about his deceased ex-fiancée. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Joseph Saunier. Joseph Saunier was born in 1955 to a respected family of doctors in Shreveport, Louisiana. From a young age, he aspired to follow in his family's footsteps and become a doctor. With exceptional abilities, Joseph earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science from the University of Baton Rouge in 1976. He then applied to Louisiana State University in Shreveport and began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Joseph effectively balanced his university studies and work. He consistently refined his knowledge through hands-on experience at the hospital. The hospital management recognized Joseph's success and dedication, and in his final year of training, he was appointed chief resident. After completing his studies, Joseph chose to specialize in pathologic anatomy and went on to become a pathologist and laboratory director in Leck, Texas. Joseph's life was marked by personal tragedy, including the loss of the woman he loved, Becky. His 27-year marriage, which he considered happy, ended in divorce when his wife fell in love with another man. Joseph accepted her decision and agreed to the divorce, believing that the woman he loved had found happiness. Joseph had a strong sense of responsibility and nobility. After his divorce from Becky, he maintained a warm relationship with her and continued to support their 2 sons. 2 years later, Becky was killed by her new husband. Joseph was shocked by her death. He often thought about their past family life and mourned her loss. Despite his own grief, Joseph remained a source of strength for his family. He took care of the funeral expenses and helped his sons cope with the trauma. His sons later credited his support for helping them overcome their pain. The tragedy had a profound impact on Joseph. He devoted himself to his work and raising his sons. However, the grief finally gave him the motivation to change his life. He decides to start a new chapter in a new city. In 2007, Joseph moved to Leck, Texas, with his sons, where he became the chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for a change, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed the classes and met new women, which helped fill the void in his life. A few times, Joseph attempted to form connections with his dance partners, but it never worked out. That was until Michelle Tina walked into his dance class on a warm summer evening. Her elegance, poise, sense of humor, and sparkling eyes immediately caught his attention. Her radiant smile illuminated the room, and Joseph knew right then that she was the one he had been searching for. Michelle, 2. Noticed Joseph's confident and respectful demeanor on the dance floor. As they danced together, the 47-year-old Michelle and 57-year-old Joseph found that they complemented each other perfectly. As they continued to dance together, they grew closer with each passing session. Eventually, Joseph asked Michelle out on a date, and she agreed. This marked the beginning of what seemed like a happy new chapter in both of their lives. Michelle possessed an irresistible charm that had a profound effect on men. Michelle was a classic example of a femme fatale, a woman with an undeniable magnetism that drew attention and sparked passion in those around her. Michelle, like Joseph, is also starting a new life after personal emotional breakdowns. She is running away from the fear and anxiety associated with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic for cosmetic surgery. Michelle met Mike in 2008 when she came in for Botox injections. At first, there was just casual social interaction between them, then light flirting followed and they began a romance. Michelle is a successful and free woman. She worked as an executive in the NFL, built a successful career, and didn't lack for anything. Mike, on the other hand, is bound by his marriage. A few months after living a double life, his wife discovered his affair with Michelle and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike is so captivated by Michelle that he barely notices that he is losing everything. Mike left his wife for Michelle, even though she never announced she would marry him. When Mike doesn't get the attention he expected, he tries to pressure Michelle, which scares her. Michelle recognized Mike's manipulative behavior and desire to take complete control of her life. This realization caused her to end the relationship. In 2010, Michelle and Mike went their separate ways. However, even after the breakup, Mike continued to pursue Michelle, urging her to return. His obsession exceeds the limit, forcing Michelle to find a way to escape Mike's control. Michelle moved to Lek to start anew, where she met Joseph, a charming and kind-hearted man. They quickly connected, and their relationship blossomed into true love. Joseph's sons and relatives welcomed Michelle with open arms. Joseph spared no expense in giving her gifts, taking her to the most luxurious restaurants and private clubs, and giving her romantic vacations. As Joseph realized he had found his perfect match, he took Michelle to Los Angeles and proposed to her in front of his entire family. Michelle, 47 at the time, was smitten with her new partner and frequently expressed her love for him on social media. However, her ex-lover, Mike Dixon, couldn't help but notice these declarations of love. Mike is furious when he discovers that Michelle has moved away and is planning to marry Joseph. He realized he couldn't win her back but still dared to propose that they rekindle their past relationship, suggesting they become lovers again. Michelle firmly rejected his proposal, refusing to engage in a love triangle, and immediately informed Joseph about Mike's suggestion. After some time, they started to feel like they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something that looked like a camera flash through the backyard window, but they didn't pay much attention to it, not realizing the seriousness of the problem. The situation got out of control on July 11, 2012, when a gardener came to Joseph's house to discuss a garden renovation project. When the landscaper arrived at the home, he tried to contact Joseph but got no response. He saw an open door and, thinking Joseph might not be able to hear him, went inside. The house was in disarray, and there was a bullet hole near the front door, indicating a possible intruder. The landscaper cautiously went further inside, looking for Joseph. In the garage, he found Joseph lying in a pool of blood on the floor with no signs of life. Joseph's body had stab and gunshot wounds, leading the landscaper to think the perpetrator might be nearby. He immediately left the house and called for help. At 2:48 p.m., the police department received the call, and several patrol cars were sent to the scene. When the officers arrived, they found Joseph Sonnier. Medics confirmed that Joseph had died. The incident shocked the public, as it happened in one of the city's safest and most affluent neighborhoods, where crime is extremely rare. Joseph, a respected professional, was known for his calm and kind nature, and it seemed he had no enemies who would want to harm him. Although a window was broken, it was clear that the incident was not a robbery, as nothing was missing from the house. However, a bottle with a hole shot through its bottom was found at the scene, suggesting it was used as a makeshift silencer for a gun. A forensic team arrived soon after to collect evidence, and it appeared that the perpetrator was inexperienced, as they left behind many traces. DNA from the bottle and blood samples were sent to a lab for further analysis. Detectives interviewed neighbors, but none of them reported seeing or hearing anything suspicious. There were no CCTV cameras near the house. According to the investigation, the perpetrator entered through a large window overlooking the backyard, making the attack unexpected. In the dining room, the attacker confronted Joseph and started shooting. It is likely that the wine bottle was used as a silencer at this point. Blood stains in the hallway suggested that Joseph was still alive after being shot. He entered the garage, where the attacker caught up with him and stabbed him multiple times. An autopsy revealed 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds. The circumstances suggested that the murder was not random, but the identity and motive of the killer remained unknown. The investigation focused on the people closest to the victim. During an interview with law enforcement, the victim's fiancée, Michelle, reported strange things in the months leading up to the murder. She believed Joseph was being stalked. Michelle had seen a stranger lurking outside Joseph's house, watching the door and windows. She also mentioned that Joseph had received persistent calls and texts in the period leading up to his death. Although officers confirmed this information, they initially thought the calls and messages were from other women with whom Joseph was allegedly having relationships, as witnesses claimed he was in contact with multiple women at the time. Investigators questioned Michelle about whether she knew of other women involved with Joseph. Michelle claimed she was unaware of any other women. Joseph's sons also denied the possibility of their father having mistresses, stating that infidelity was not in his character. Despite this, investigators continued to explore a motive of jealousy for the crime. During the subsequent interrogation, Michelle succumbs to the pressure and reveals that she knows several women who may be involved in the crime. According to Michelle, these women are ex-girlfriends who often stalk Joseph. Although he ignored them, they continued to express their displeasure about his upcoming wedding to Michelle. The women in question include a woman from Florida who persisted in contacting Joseph even after he revealed his relationship with Michelle. There was also a nurse, Joseph's colleague, who often called and wrote to him. Additionally, a woman whose daughter sent a letter accusing Joseph of abandoning them shortly before the murder. In the same interview, Michelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. She hadn't thought about Mike spying on her and Joseph before, because Mike stopped paying attention to her after she refused to be his lover. Michelle assumed that Mike had accepted her decision to marry Joseph and move on with his own life. The police visited Mike. He cooperated and spoke with the detectives. Mike revealed that he had been deeply in love with Michelle and had even divorced his wife to pursue a future with her. However, after Michelle rejected him, Mike gave up. He started a new relationship with a younger medical student who corroborated his alibi. At the time of the crime, Mike was at work and then spent time with his new girlfriend, which confirmed he couldn't have been involved. The investigation encountered significant obstacles. Every suspect, including Michelle, had a solid alibi, leaving detectives stumped. They searched for enemies of Joseph or individuals who might benefit financially from his death. But no new leads emerged. Unfortunately, forensic analysis does not provide any information about an individual, so police cannot identify the owner of the DNA found at the crime scene. Just as the case seemed hopeless, the police received an unexpected call from Paul Reynolds. Reynolds reported that his roommate, David Shepard, had recently confessed to a murder in Leck and then attempted to take his own life but was saved. According to Reynolds, a neighbor shared specific details about David's crimes with him, including details that only a few detectives knew, such as the use of a glass bottle as a silencer. This new information led police to conclude that Shepard was indeed connected to the crime. The witness came forward claiming that David was not the mastermind behind the crime, but rather a person who was hired by an unknown doctor involved in plastic surgery. Police launched an investigation into the new suspect and discovered that Mike Dixon was the person who hired David. When questioned at the police station, David began to confess and revealed that Mike Dixon had indeed hired him to commit the crime. According to David, he and Mike met at a bar while both were going through difficult breakups and formed a friendship. Mike shared his sadness over his lost love, Michelle, who was now engaged to someone else. He claimed that he couldn't move on and was willing to do whatever it took to win her back. David alleged that the initial plan was to discredit Joseph, Michelle's current partner, in the hopes that Michelle would leave him and return to Mike. However, David claimed that murder was not part of the original plan. First, women were paid $1,000 each to pretend to be Joseph's mistresses and pursue him. Additionally, a letter arrived from a woman claiming Joseph had abandoned her and their child. Joseph consistently denied these allegations, and Michelle believed him. It was later revealed that the camera flash seen by the couple was actually the light from David's cell phone flashlight. David had been driving to their house to create the illusion of surveillance. Funded by Mike Dixon, who covered gas and other expenses. When these tactics failed to break the couple apart, Mike plotted a more extreme solution. He offered David 3 silver bars, valued at around $110,000, to kill the pathologist. David agreed and received one of the bars as a deposit, which he immediately sold at a pawn shop. According to David Shepard, the situation escalated out of control when he went to Joseph's house. He claimed the shooting was unintentional, and that after shooting Joseph, he became afraid and Joseph began to run away. David shouted to check on Joseph but received no response. He then followed Joseph into the garage, where he found Joseph lying still and heard his last breath. David rushed to check Joseph's pulse and confirmed that Joseph was dead. David admitted to stabbing Joseph several times but could not remember the exact number. David also admitted that he considered calling for help using Joseph's phone, but ultimately chose not to. Instead, he put the phone back, mutilated Joseph's body, and then went to Mike's house to get the rest of the gold before attempting to take his own life. According to David, he didn't fully understand what he was getting himself into. When he faced Joseph, he realized he could not continue killing. If it weren't for an accidental gunshot, Joseph might still be alive. Mike Dixon was arrested by the police on the same day and charged with first-degree murder. This was based on testimony from David, as well as a large amount of other evidence that included incriminating phone calls and text messages where Mike made explicit confessions. When Mike Dixon was first interviewed by detectives, they had hoped he would confess to the crime. However, he denied everything and asked for a lawyer, which led to a lawsuit. David Shepard, who had been involved in the crime, made a deal with the prosecutor where he pleaded guilty to his role and gave up his right to appeal the sentence. As a result of this deal, David received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, instead of the death penalty. Mike Dixon, on the other hand, maintained that he was not guilty, despite the circumstantial evidence against him. However, in a surprising turn of events, David, who was a key witness for the prosecution, changed his story during the trial. Under oath, David claimed that he had committed the crime alone and that Mike Dixon was not involved. He said that the silver bars found at the scene were meant to be used as an investment in a business that the two of them had planned to start. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and a retrial was declared. The second trial occurred in 2016, resulting in Mike's conviction for first-degree murder and a life sentence without parole. However, his lawyers successfully appealed the judgment, and it was overturned. Mike was released on $2 million bail, but the case was far from over. The prosecution sought to reinstate the original sentence through the state's highest criminal court, which would have otherwise led to a third trial. On February 11, 2019, the prosecution's motion was granted, and in April 2020, Mike's bail was revoked, prompting a new arrest warrant. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ultimately reversed the lower court's decision, reinstating Mike's life sentence without parole. The judge ordered Mike to continue serving his sentence, and he is currently incarcerated in a Texas prison.